A mail-order bride steps off the stagecoach, twin babies clutched to her chest, only to watch her promised future crumble in seconds. The groom takes one look at her children and walks away, leaving her stranded in a town of strangers with nothing but a trunk and two crying infants. Rejected, humiliated, alone. But when a widowed doctor witnesses her public shame, he sees something the others missed: strength that cannot be broken. This is the story of how rejection became salvation, and how an unwanted woman built a family from the ashes of abandonment. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop with a groan of wood and iron, sending up a cloud of dust that hung in the frigid March air like a veil between worlds. Clara Hayes sat rigid on the worn bench, her arms aching from hours of holding her babies close, protecting them from every bump and jolt across 200 miles of unforgiving terrain. 6-month-old James slept against her left shoulder, his tiny fist clutching the fabric of her traveling cloak. His sister Emma stirred restlessly on her right, making the soft whimpering sounds that meant she'd wake hungry and unhappy within minutes. Claire's hands trembled as she smoothed Emma's dark hair, the same deep brown as the husband she'd buried 4 months ago. Thomas. His name was still a knife in her chest, sharp and sudden every time she allowed herself to think it. Cholera had swept through their Philadelphia neighborhood like an avenging angel, taking him in 3 brutal days. She'd been 6 months pregnant, already struggling to care for their toddler son, only to lose little Henry to the same disease a week after his father. The twins had come early, born in grief and chaos, too small and too fragile. But they'd survived. They'd fought. And now they were all she had left in the world. "Millbrook Station," the driver called, his voice rough from the cold. "End of the line, folks." Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she'd been preparing for, planning for, dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Somewhere beyond that dust cloud, beyond the rough wooden buildings she could glimpse through the coach window, was Edmund Crowley, the man who'd answered her carefully worded advertisement, the man who'd exchanged 6 letters with her over the past 2 months, the man who'd sent money for her passage west and promised her a home, security, and a fresh start. The man who had no idea she was bringing 2 babies. Clara's stomach twisted. She'd tried to tell him. Lord knows she'd tried. She'd written the letter 4 times, each version carefully explaining about the twins, about her circumstances, about her desperate need for honesty before she made this impossible journey. But each time, her hand had frozen before she could seal the envelope. What if he said no? What if he withdrew his offer? Where would she go? Her sister's husband had made it clear there was no room for Clara and 2 infants in their already crowded Boston home. The boarding house where she'd been staying had given her until the end of February to pay 3 months of back rent or leave. She'd had no choice. She'd taken the coward's way out, telling herself that Edmund seemed kind in his letters, that he'd understand once he met her, that everything would work out somehow. Now, as the other passengers began gathering their belongings and climbing down from the coach, Clara felt the full weight of her deception settling over her like a shroud. "Ma'am?" The driver appeared at the coach door, his weathered face creasing with concern when he saw her still sitting there, frozen. "This is your stop, ain't it? Got someone meeting you?" "Yes," Clara managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I'm expected." "Need help with your trunk?" "Please." She shifted Emma to join her brother in her left arm, wincing at the immediate strain in her shoulder, and accepted the driver's hand with her right. Her legs felt like water as she stepped down onto the dusty street, her simple gray traveling dress already showing the stains and wrinkles of the long journey. She'd done her best this morning to look presentable, pinning her blonde hair into a neat bun, washing her face and hands at the last way station. But she knew she must look exhausted, haggard, nothing like the respectable young widow she'd described in her letters. The twins began to fuss in earnest now, both of them stirring toward wakefulness. Clara bounced them gently, making the soft, shushing sounds that sometimes soothed them, but her attention was already fixed on the cluster of people gathered near the general store across the street. A man stood at the center of the group, tall and broad-shouldered in a fine wool coat that marked him as a person of means in this rough frontier town. His dark hair was carefully pomaded, his beard trimmed close. Even from this distance, Clara could see the tension in his posture, the way his eyes scanned each passenger who disembarked. Edmund Crowley. It had to be him. For one wild moment, Clara considered climbing back into the stagecoach, begging the driver to take her anywhere else. Even back to Philadelphia with its ghosts and its cholera and its memories. But the driver was already hauling her trunk down from the top of the coach, and Emma had begun to cry in earnest, her tiny voice cutting through the afternoon air like an accusation. The man's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes found Clara. She watched his expression change in the space of a heartbeat. Curiosity became recognition. Recognition became confusion. Confusion became something cold and hard that made Clara's blood turn to ice. He began walking toward her, his boots striking the packed earth with sharp, deliberate steps. The crowd followed, curiosity drawing them like moths to a flame. Clara could feel their stares, could hear the whispers already beginning. "Miss Hayes?" Edmund Crowley stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the anger building in his dark eyes, far enough to make it clear he had no intention of closing the distance. "Clara Hayes from Philadelphia?" "Yes." She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze even as Emma's cries intensified and James began to stir. "Mr. Crowley, What is this?" His voice was sharp, each word precisely clipped. He gestured at the babies, not quite pointing, but the motion full of accusation nonetheless. "What are those?" Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "These are my children, my son James and my daughter Emma. They're your children." He said it like the words tasted foul. "You have children, 2 of them. I tried to tell you in my letters. I wanted to explain." "Explain?" Edmund's voice rose, and the whispers around them grew louder. "Explain how you thought you could deceive me? Trap me into taking on another man's bastards? They're not bastards." Clara's own voice cracked like a whip, surprising her with its strength. "I was married. My husband died. I'm a widow, just as I told you in my very first letter. A widow with convenient additions you somehow forgot to mention." Edmund turned to address the crowd, playing to them like an actor on a stage. "I opened my home to this woman in good faith, offered her marriage, security, a position of respect in this community, and this is how she repays that generosity, with lies and deception." An older woman near the front of the crowd clucked her tongue disapprovingly. A younger man laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. Clara felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, suffocating her. Emma's cries had reached a fever pitch, and James had joined in now, both of them screaming their hunger and discomfort to the uncaring sky. "Please," Clara said, hating the pleading note in her voice but unable to stop it. "Just let me explain. I know I should have told you sooner, but I was desperate. I had nowhere else to go, no way to feed them, no—" "So you thought you'd make your problems mine?" Edmund's lip curled. "Did you truly believe I'd be so foolish? So desperate for a wife that I'd take on a woman with 2 squalling brats and a history of poor judgment?" The words hit like physical blows. Clara felt something inside her chest crack, some last fragile hope she'd been clutching, breaking apart. "I made no poor judgment," she said quietly, and this time her voice held steel. "I loved my husband. He was a good man. We built a good life together until the sickness took him. That's not poor judgment, Mr. Crowley. That's grief." For a moment, something flickered in Edmund's eyes. Not quite shame, but perhaps a recognition that he'd gone too far. But then his jaw hardened, and whatever momentary weakness he'd shown vanished. "I don't care about your sad story, Miss Hayes. Half the women in the territories are widows with hard-luck tales. What I care about is that you lied to me, deliberately, knowingly." "I didn't lie. Omission is the same as deception." He turned his back on her, addressing the crowd again. "I want everyone here to witness that I'm refusing this arrangement. Miss Hayes came here under false pretenses, and I'm exercising my right to reject this contract. I owe her nothing." The finality in his voice was absolute. Clara stood there, her babies screaming in her arms, her trunk sitting in the dust at her feet, and watched Edmund Crowley walk away. Watched him climb into a fine buggy. Watched him drive off without a backward glance, leaving her alone in the center of a circle of strangers who looked at her with varying degrees of pity, contempt, and cruel amusement. The stagecoach driver shifted uncomfortably beside her trunk. Ma'am, is there somewhere else I can take you? Someone else you can... He trailed off, clearly already knowing the answer. There was no one. Claire had spent her last dollar on the stagecoach ticket. She had no family here, no friends, no prospects. She'd gambled everything on Edmund Crowley's letters, on his promises, on the hope that the frontier was big enough and rough enough that a widow with 2 babies might still find a place. She'd been wrong. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment over. A few women whispered to each other as they passed, loud enough for Clara to hear fragments. Shameful. Tricked him. Those poor babies. Clara closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry. Not here, not in front of these people. The twins needed her to be strong. She could fall apart later when she was alone, wherever alone would be. Miss Hayes? The voice was different from the others, softer, gentler, with a warm Irish lilt that reminded Clara achingly of her grandmother. She opened her eyes to find a woman of perhaps 50 years standing before her, round-faced and kind-eyed, wearing a sensible brown dress and a thick wool shawl. I'm Margaret Doyle, the woman said. I run the boarding house just down the street. She nodded toward a 2-story building with peeling white paint and a sign that read Doyle House in fading letters. Why don't you come with me, dear? Get those babies out of this cold and into someplace warm. Claire's throat tightened. I don't have money for... We'll sort that out later. Margaret reached out and gently touched Emma's back, and the baby's cries softened slightly at the warmth of another human touch. Right now, these little ones need feeding and you need sitting down before you fall down. Come on then. She gestured to a young man hovering nearby, her son, by the resemblance. Patrick grabbed the lady's trunk. The boy, barely 20, with his mother's kind eyes and a shock of red hair, hurried forward and hefted Clara's trunk onto his shoulder as though it weighed nothing. Margaret took Clara's elbow, supporting her with surprising strength, and guided her across the street. Clara went numbly, too exhausted and shocked to protest. The babies had settled into miserable whimpering now, their cries diminishing to hitching sobs. She could feel their hunger, their need, their dependence on her pulling at her like chains. She had to feed them, had to care for them, had to find some way forward, even though every path seemed blocked. The boarding house was shabby but clean, with worn floorboards and faded wallpaper, but an air of genuine warmth that was worth more than any elegant decoration. Margaret led her through a small parlor where 3 men sat playing cards, and into a kitchen dominated by a massive iron stove that radiated blessed heat. Sit. Margaret pointed to a chair at the scrubbed wooden table. Let me see those babies. Clara sank into the chair gratefully, her arms trembling with exhaustion. Margaret took James first, settling him into the crook of her arm with the practiced ease of someone who'd raised children of her own, then took Emma with equal efficiency. The twins stared up at her with wide, uncertain eyes, but they'd stopped crying, lulled by the warmth and the calm confidence in Margaret's handling. Patrick, fetch some milk from the cold box and warm it. Not too hot, mind. Margaret examined the babies with a critical but gentle eye. How old? 6 months. Claire's voice came out hoarse. They came early, after my husband died. Margaret nodded, asking no questions, passing no judgment. They look healthy enough, just hungry and tired from the journey. You been feeding them yourself or with bottles? Myself, mostly, but I've been drying up. The admission was humiliating, but Clara was too tired to care about pride anymore. The stress, the worry... I've been trying to supplement with milk and bread mash, but it's been hard. Well, we'll get some proper food into them, and into you too. Margaret shifted the babies as Patrick brought over a small pot of warmed milk. You know how to use a sugar tit? Clara shook her head, and Margaret demonstrated, soaking a piece of clean cloth in the warm milk, twisting it into a small knob, and offering it to Emma. The baby latched on immediately, sucking hungrily. Patrick brought another cloth, and soon both twins were occupied with their makeshift bottles, the kitchen filled with the sound of their eager feeding. Margaret set the babies in a large wicker basket she pulled from a corner, patting it with soft blankets and placing it near the stove's warmth. Then she turned to Clara, her expression serious. Now then, tell me straight. Because I need to know what we're dealing with. Do you have any money at all? Clara swallowed. $3.27. Family anywhere who could send more? No. The father of those babies, you said he died? Cholera. 4 months ago. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. We had a son too, Henry. He was 3. The disease took them both within 2 weeks. Margaret's expression softened with genuine sorrow. Lord have mercy. And Crowley knew none of this? I told him I was a widow. I told him I was alone. I couldn't bring myself to mention the babies. The words came faster now, tumbling out in a rush of confession. I knew he might refuse if he knew, and I had nowhere else to go. My sister's husband won't take us in. The boarding house in Philadelphia was going to throw us out. I didn't know what else to do. So you gambled on Crowley being a decent man who'd do right by you once he saw you face to face. Margaret sighed. Unfortunately, Edmund Crowley is a lot of things. But decent isn't one of them. Rich, yes. Influential, certainly. But he's also a cold fish who cares more about appearances and his own comfort than about Christian charity. The bitterness in her voice suggested history, but Clara didn't have the energy to ask about it. What do I do now? The question came out as barely a whisper. I have $3. 2 babies who need constant care. No husband, no home, no prospects. I can't even afford to go back to Philadelphia, even if there was anything to go back to. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying Clara with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her bones. Finally, she spoke. You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure something out. I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. Margaret moved to the stove, ladling soup from a large pot into a bowl. Eat this. Then you can take the babies up to the room at the end of the hall on the 2nd floor. It's small, but it has a bed and a chair and a window that closes tight. You look like you haven't slept properly in weeks. I haven't. Clara accepted the bowl with shaking hands, the savory smell of beef and vegetables making her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. Mrs. Doyle, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got a whole lot of trouble to sort through before you're out of the woods. Margaret settled into the chair opposite, folding her work-worn hands on the table. But I'll tell you something, girl. I've been in this town for 23 years. I've seen women come and go, seen marriages made and broken, seen the whole cycle of frontier life play out 100 times. And I've learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Clara looked up from her soup, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. How is this the best thing? Because Edmund Crowley would have made you miserable. Margaret's voice was firm, certain. He would have taken those babies and made them feel like unwanted burdens every day of their lives. He would have held his generosity over your head like a sword, reminding you constantly of how much he'd sacrificed to take you in. You'd have been a servant in your own home, Clara Hayes, and those children would have grown up knowing they were resented. The words rang with the truth of experience. Clara wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. But at least we'd have had a roof over our heads. At least we'd have been safe. Safety that costs your soul is no safety at all. Margaret leaned forward. You listen to me. You're young yet. Only what? 25? 26? 24. 24, and you've already survived more than most women face in a lifetime. You buried a husband and a child. You brought 2 babies into this world alone. You crossed half a country with nothing but hope and courage. That kind of strength doesn't just disappear because some pompous fool can't see what's standing right in front of him. Clara wanted to believe her, wanted to feel that strength Margaret spoke of, but all she felt was tired, bone-deep, and soul-weary, exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about how you feel, dear. It's about what you do even when you feel like giving up. Margaret rose and began moving around the kitchen, banking the fire, covering the remaining soup. Finish eating, then take those babies upstairs and get some rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to worry about tomorrow. Clara ate mechanically, barely tasting the food but feeling its warmth spread through her. In their basket, the twins had fallen asleep, their tiny faces peaceful now that their bellies were full. They looked so much like Thomas, Emma with his dark hair and delicate features, James with his serious expression and long fingers. Looking at them hurt and healed in equal measure. When she'd finished the soup and a thick slice of bread Margaret insisted she eat, Clara carefully lifted the basket and followed the older woman upstairs. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, a simple chair, and a washstand. But it was clean, and it was warm, and most importantly, it was private. A place where she could finally let herself fall apart without an audience. Margaret helped her settle the babies in their basket next to the bed, showed her where the extra blankets were stored, and pointed out the chamber pot tucked discreetly under the washstand. There's a necessary outback, but you won't want to be going out in the cold at night with these two to watch. Water in the pitcher is fresh. If you need anything, I'm in the room at the other end of the hall. Mrs. Doyle? Clara's voice caught. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. The older woman paused in the doorway, her hand on the frame. I had a daughter once, she said quietly. She'd be about your age now, if she'd lived. Died of fever when she was 12, and I wasn't there because I was working at some rich woman's house, trying to earn enough to put food on our table. She looked at Clara with eyes that held old grief but no bitterness. I couldn't help her, but I can help you. That's reason enough. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Clara stood in the center of the small room, listening to the twins' soft breathing, feeling the walls of her carefully maintained composure finally crumbling. She made it to the chair before her legs gave out, sinking into it as the sobs came, harsh, tearing sounds that felt like they were being ripped from somewhere deep inside her. She cried for Thomas, gone before his time. For little Henry, who'd never grow up to be the man his father would have been so proud of. For the life she'd lost and the future she'd gambled away on a stranger's promises. For the humiliation of this afternoon, the cruelty in Edmund Crowley's eyes, the whispers of the townspeople. For the impossible weight of responsibility she carried. The constant terror that she wouldn't be enough, wouldn't be able to keep her babies alive and safe and fed. But eventually, the tears slowed. The sobs became hiccups, then simply ragged breathing. Clara wiped her face with her hands, staring at the darkening window as the last light of day faded into dusk. She could hear sounds from downstairs, voices, the clink of dishes, the ordinary sounds of life going on despite everything. Despite everything, she was still here, still breathing, still capable of standing up, of washing her face in the cold water from the pitcher, of checking on her sleeping babies, of pulling off her traveling dress and collapsing into the narrow bed in her chemise. As she lay there in the gathering darkness, Clara made herself a promise. Whatever came tomorrow, whatever struggles and humiliations and hardships awaited, she would face them. Not because she felt strong, but because Margaret Doyle was right. Strength wasn't about how you felt. It was about what you did even when you wanted to give up. And Clara Hayes had two small, perfect reasons never to give up. Two babies who depended on her, who needed her, who deserved more than a mother who crumbled at the first sign of trouble. Edmund Crowley had rejected her. The town had judged her. The future she'd planned had disappeared like smoke. But Clara was still here, still fighting, and somehow, some way she would find a path forward. She had to. Because the alternative was unthinkable. The next morning came too soon, announced by Emma's hungry cries and the pale gray light seeping through the thin curtains. Clara dragged herself from sleep, every muscle aching from the journey and the stress of the previous day. She fed the babies as best she could, changed their diapers with the last of her clean cloths, and dressed herself in her only other dress, a plain brown wool that was worn at the cuffs but at least clean. When she made her way downstairs, still carrying both babies, she found Margaret in the kitchen already, making breakfast for the boarders. The smell of coffee and frying bacon made Clara's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. "Sit," Margaret commanded, the same as yesterday. "You look like you slept in your clothes. Did you sleep at all?" "Some." Clara settled into a chair, adjusting James and Emma in her arms. "They woke twice in the night." "Babies do that." Margaret poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug and set it in front of Clara. "Drink. You'll need the fortification." "For what?" "For facing the day." Margaret cracked eggs into a pan with brisk efficiency. "Word will have spread by now about yesterday. The whole town will know Edmund Crowley refused you. Some will sympathize, some will judge. Most will just be glad for the gossip. You need to be prepared for stares and whispers." Clara's hands tightened on the coffee mug. I don't know if I can face that. You can, because the alternative is hiding in that room upstairs until your money runs out, and that helps nobody. Margaret slid scrambled eggs and bacon onto a plate and brought it to the table. Eat. Then we're going to talk about what comes next. What came next, it turned out, was a brutally honest assessment of Clara's situation. Margaret laid it out while Clara ate, her voice matter of fact but not unkind. You need work. Not just any work. Something that pays enough to feed you and those babies and put a roof over your heads. This is a small town, Clara. Opportunities for respectable employment for women are limited. You could try for a position as a domestic servant, but most families here can't afford help, and those that can will hesitate to hire a woman with 2 infants in tow. What about taking in laundry or sewing? Possible, but the pay is terrible and the work is backbreaking, and you'd still need childcare while you worked. Margaret poured herself coffee and sat across from Clara. I've been thinking about this half the night, and I keep coming back to one possibility. It's not perfect, and it comes with its own complications, but it might be your best option. Clara set down her fork. What is it? Dr. Lucas Bennett, the town physician, has been looking for help. His wife died 18 months ago, and he's been trying to manage his practice and his household alone ever since. He needs someone who can keep his office organized, prepare medications, clean and sterilize instruments, maybe help with minor procedures. It's respectable work, it pays decently, and he has a room above his office that's been sitting empty. He might be willing to include housing as part of the arrangement. Hope fluttered in Clara's chest, fragile as a moth. Do you think he'd consider me? I think it's worth asking. Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. Lucas Bennett is a good man, fair, honest, dedicated to his work. He's been grieving hard for his wife, but he's not the type to wallow. If you can convince him you're capable and willing to learn, he might give you a chance. But the babies, you'd have to be honest about them from the start. No more omissions, Clara. No more desperate gambles. If he says no, at least you'll know you tried. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. And if he says yes, you might just have found yourself a future worth fighting for. The doctor's office sat on the corner of Main Street and Church, a modest single-story building with a painted sign that read Lucas Bennett, M.D., in simple black letters. Clara stood outside for a full minute, gathering her courage, before she finally shifted the twins in her arms and pushed open the door. A small bell chimed, announcing her entrance. The front room was clearly a waiting area, with several chairs lined against the walls and a desk positioned near a closed interior door. Medical certificates hung on the walls alongside anatomical diagrams that Clara quickly looked away from. The space was clean but cluttered, papers stacked haphazardly on the desk, books piled on chairs, the general air of a place maintained by someone too busy to properly organize it. The interior door opened and a man emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. He was younger than Clara had expected, perhaps 35, with dark brown hair that needed cutting and intelligent gray eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He wore shirt sleeves and a vest, his collar unbuttoned, the casual appearance of someone who'd been working hard and hadn't bothered with formalities. He stopped when he saw Clara, his eyes going immediately to the babies in her arms. For one terrible moment, Clara braced herself for another rejection, another look of cold dismissal. But Dr. Bennett's expression held only polite curiosity. Good morning. Are you here with a medical concern? Are the children ill? No, Clara said quickly. No, they're healthy. Mrs. Doyle sent me. She said you might need help with your practice? Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that might have been resignation. You're the woman from yesterday, the one Edmund Crowley rejected at the stagecoach. Clara's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. Yes, my name is Clara Hayes. Lucas Bennett. He gestured to one of the few clear chairs. Please sit. You look like you're about to drop those babies. She sank gratefully into the chair, and Dr. Bennett pulled another over, clearing it of books before sitting down himself. He studied her for a moment, his gaze clinical but not unkind. Margaret told you I needed help? She said you've been managing alone since your wife passed. I'm sorry for your loss. A shadow crossed his face, but he nodded acknowledgement. Thank you. And yes, I have been struggling to keep up with everything. The medical practice alone is demanding. and maintaining the office and living quarters on top of that. He trailed off, then seemed to refocus. But I'm not sure what Margaret thought I could offer you, Mrs. Hayes. This isn't a position for someone with dependents. There it was. The polite dismissal Clara had been expecting, but something in her refused to accept it, not without trying. May I ask what the position would entail? Dr. Bennett looked surprised by the question, but he answered, primarily organization and preparation, maintaining patient records, scheduling appointments, ensuring instruments are properly cleaned and sterilized, preparing medications and tinctures, restocking supplies. Eventually, if you proved capable, you might assist with minor procedures, holding retractors during suturing, applying bandages, that sort of thing. I can do all of that, Clara said firmly. Can you? His tone wasn't mocking, just genuinely curious. Do you have any medical training? No formal training, but I nursed my husband and son through their final illness. I know how to follow instructions precisely, how to keep things clean, how to stay calm in difficult situations. She met his eyes directly. I'm not afraid of hard work, Dr. Bennett, and I'm not afraid of blood or sickness or death. I've seen all three up close. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of respect perhaps. Those are valuable qualities, but Mrs. Hayes, I need someone who can work long hours, sometimes unpredictable hours. Medical emergencies don't respect schedules. How would you manage that with 2 infants to care for? It was a fair question. Claire had been asking herself the same thing all morning. You mentioned living quarters above the office? Yes, a small apartment, 2 rooms, and a kitchen. If that were part of the arrangement, if I lived here, I could bring the babies with me. Keep them nearby while I worked. They're generally quiet during the day, and at 6 months they sleep more than they're awake. I could set up a safe space for them where I could see them while I handled the clerical work. She was speaking quickly now, the plan forming even as she articulated it. I'm organized by necessity, Dr. Bennett. I have to be, managing 2 babies alone. That organization would extend to your practice. He was listening, actually listening, not just waiting for her to finish so he could refuse. Encouraged, Clara pressed on. Mrs. Doyle spoke highly of you. She said you were fair and honest. I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove myself. A trial period, 2 weeks. If I can't manage the work and the babies, if I prove to be more hindrance than help, I'll leave without complaint. Dr. Bennett was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. Emma chose that moment to make a small cooing sound, and his eyes went to her, softening almost imperceptibly. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the baby. Surprised, Clara nodded. Dr. Bennett reached out and gently examined Emma with hands that were clearly accustomed to touching patients, checking her eyes, her color, feeling gently at her neck and abdomen. She's small for 6 months. She and her brother were born early, and it's been difficult to keep them properly fed. He moved to James next, conducting the same gentle examination. They're undernourished, but otherwise healthy. Sturdy, actually, given the circumstances. He settled back in his chair. Mrs. Hayes, what happened to their father? Clara's throat tightened. Cholera. It swept through our neighborhood in Philadelphia last autumn. My husband Thomas died first, then our son Henry. He was 3. I was 6 months pregnant when I lost them both. Dr. Bennett's expression darkened with professional concern. And you carried the pregnancy to term while grieving? That couldn't have been easy. Nothing about the last 4 months has been easy. The words came out harsher than she'd intended, edged with exhaustion and frustration. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... No, don't apologize. He shook his head. You're right, I asked an insensitive question. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the street. I lost my wife to childbed fever. She and the baby both. I'm a doctor, and I couldn't save either of them. The pain in his voice was raw, unhealed. Clara recognized it because she carried the same wound. I'm sorry. Everyone is sorry. He turned back to face her. But sorry doesn't change anything, does it? The dead stay dead, and the living have to figure out how to keep going. Yes, Clara said quietly. Exactly that. They looked at each other across the cluttered office, 2 people carrying grief like stones in their pockets, too heavy to put down but too familiar to leave behind. In that moment, Clara felt something shift. Not attraction, nothing so simple, but recognition. A sense that here was someone who understood what it meant to have your life torn apart and have to rebuild from wreckage. Dr. Bennett seemed to come to some decision. 2 weeks, he said abruptly. Trial period, as you suggested. Room and board included, plus $2 a week. If it works out, we'll discuss making it permanent. If it doesn't, you're free to seek other employment with no hard feelings. Relief washed over Clara so powerfully she felt dizzy. Thank you. You won't regret this, I promise. We'll see. But there was the ghost of a smile on his face. Can you start today? I have 3 patients scheduled this afternoon, and the office is clearly in desperate need of organization. I can start right now. And so Clara Hayes found herself with employment, housing, and the fragile beginnings of hope. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the security of marriage she'd been seeking. But it was a chance, honestly offered and gratefully accepted. As Dr. Bennett showed her around the office, explaining his system, or lack thereof, for organizing patient files, Clara allowed herself to believe that perhaps Margaret Doyle had been right. Perhaps the worst thing that could have happened was actually the beginning of something better. Only time would tell. The apartment above the medical office was smaller than Clara had imagined, but it was clean and structurally sound, which was more than she'd dared hope for. 2 narrow rooms connected by a doorway with no door, a kitchen area that was little more than a wood stove and a dry sink, and windows that actually had glass in them instead of oiled paper. Dr. Bennett had apologized for the sparse furnishings, a bed frame with a thin mattress, a single chair, a small table. But to Clara, who'd spent the last months in a cramped Philadelphia boarding house room, it looked like a palace. I'll have Patrick bring your trunk up from Margaret's, Dr. Bennett said, standing awkwardly in the doorway as Clara set the twins down in their basket. And I believe there's a cradle in the storage room downstairs. My wife had it made when she was expecting. I haven't been able to bring myself to... He stopped, cleared his throat. You're welcome to use it. Clara turned to face him, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the doorframe as though he needed its support. Dr. Bennett, if this is too difficult... It's been 18 months, he said, his voice flat. At some point, useful items should be used, not left to gather dust because I'm afraid of memories. He managed a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. The cradle is sturdy, better than a basket on the floor. I'll bring it up this evening. He left before Clara could thank him, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. She stood in the center of her new home, such as it was, and felt the weight of other people's grief pressing against her own. This building held ghosts, Dr. Bennett's wife and child, her own, Thomas and Henry. Perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps grief recognized grief, and there was a strange comfort in knowing she wasn't the only one haunted by what had been lost. But there was no time to dwell on such thoughts. The twins needed feeding, the apartment needed basic cleaning, and she'd promised to start work immediately. Clara moved through the necessary tasks with the efficiency born of months of desperate survival. Nursing the babies, settling them for a nap, unpacking the few belongings from the small bag she'd carried from Margaret's, wiping down the dusty surfaces with a rag she found under the sink. Within an hour, she was downstairs in the medical office, ready to begin. Dr. Bennett looked up from the examination table where he was checking an elderly man's breathing, surprise flickering across his face. Mrs. Hayes, I didn't expect you quite so soon. The babies are sleeping, and I thought I'd make use of the time. Clara glanced around the chaotic office, her fingers already itching to restore order to the scattered papers and misplaced instruments. Where would you like me to start? The filing system would be a good beginning, he said, turning his attention back to his patient. Mr. Hoffman, your lungs sound clearer than last week. Continue with the steam treatments twice daily. The old man nodded, wheezing slightly as he buttoned his shirt. Thank you, doctor. I'm breathing easier already. As Dr. Bennett helped his patient to the door, Clara moved to the desk and began examining the papers stacked there. Patient records, receipts for medical supplies, correspondence from other physicians, even what appeared to be someone's recipe for apple preserves, all jumbled together without any discernible organization. She started sorting, creating separate piles, her mind already working out a logical system. I used to keep everything alphabetized, Dr. Bennett said, returning to stand beside her. But after Catherine died, things rather fell apart. There never seemed to be enough hours in the day. Alphabetical is a good start, Clara agreed, scanning the names on various documents. But you might also consider organizing by date of last visit and keeping active patients separate from those you haven't seen in over a year. It would make it easier to track who needs follow-up care. He studied her with those intelligent gray eyes, a hint of approval in his expression. That's actually quite sensible. How did you come to think of it? My husband was a bookkeeper, Clara said, her hands never pausing in their sorting. He used to complain about poorly organized ledgers. I picked up a few principles from listening to him. The mention of Thomas sent the familiar ache through her chest, but it was duller now, more manageable. Grief was learning to live with absence. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Clara organized files while Dr. Bennett saw patients, a young mother with a colicky baby, a ranch hand with a gashed hand that needed stitching, a woman suffering from persistent headaches. Between appointments, Clara asked questions, learning the layout of the office, the location of supplies, the names of commonly prescribed medications. Dr. Bennett answered patiently, clearly pleased to have competent help, though he remained somewhat formal, maintaining a professional distance that Clara appreciated. She was reorganizing the medicine cabinet, alphabetizing bottles of tinctures and powders, when she heard the bell above the door chime. Heavy footsteps entered the waiting room, and a voice she recognized made her stomach clench. Dr. Bennett, I need a word with you. Edmund Crowley. Clara's hand stilled on the bottle she'd been holding. She heard Dr. Bennett's chair scrape as he stood. Mr. Crowley, what can I do for you? You can explain why you've hired that woman. Crowley's voice was tight with anger. The one from the stagecoach. I saw her coming out of your office earlier. There was a pause. When Dr. Bennett spoke, his tone was carefully neutral. Mrs. Hayes is my new assistant. I fail to see how that concerns you. It concerns me because she's a liar and a manipulator, Crowley snapped. She tried to trap me into marriage by concealing the fact that she has 2 bastard children. That kind of deception speaks to her character, Doctor. Or rather, her lack of it. Clara's face burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to remain still, to keep breathing quietly. The medicine cabinet was in the back room, separated from the waiting area by a curtained doorway. If she stayed silent, perhaps this conversation would end without her having to face Crowley's contempt again. I'm aware of Mrs. Hayes's circumstances, Dr. Bennett said, and there was an edge to his voice now that hadn't been there before. She was honest with me about her children from the outset. As for their legitimacy, she was married to their father. She's a widow, not a fallen woman. So she claims. Crowley's skepticism was palpable. But you have only her word for that, don't you? A woman desperate enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger is capable of any deception. Mr. Crowley? Dr. Bennett's voice had gone cold. I'll thank you not to slander my employee in her workplace. Mrs. Hayes's personal life is none of your concern, particularly since you made it abundantly clear yesterday that you wanted nothing to do with her. I'm trying to warn you, Bennett. The woman is trouble. She'll cause problems for your practice, for your reputation. People in this town respect you, but that respect won't protect you if you're seen as harboring a woman of questionable morals. The curtain moved aside, and Clara stepped into the waiting room before she could stop herself. Both men turned to look at her, Crowley with satisfaction at having provoked a reaction, Dr. Bennett with something that might have been concern. Mr. Crowley, Clara said, proud that her voice emerged steady despite the trembling in her hands. I understand that you're angry with me. I should have been honest with you from the beginning about my children. That was wrong of me, and I apologize. Crowley's expression suggested he hadn't expected an apology, but he recovered quickly. Your apology doesn't change the facts. No, it doesn't. Clara lifted her chin. The facts are that I'm a widow with 2 children who needs to work to support them. Dr. Bennett has given me an opportunity to do that honestly and respectably. I intend to prove myself worthy of his trust. What you think of me personally is your own affair, but I'd ask that you not interfere with my employment. Your employment is a mistake, Crowley said flatly, and I'm not the only one who'll think so. You'll see. He turned and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. The bell's cheerful jingle seemed obscene in the tense silence that followed. Dr. Bennett moved to the window, watching Crowley's retreating form. I apologize for that, he said quietly. Edmund Crowley is not a pleasant man at the best of times, but his behavior toward you has been unconscionable. He's not entirely wrong, though. Claire's throat felt tight. I did deceive him, and my presence here might cause problems for you. Let me be very clear about something, Mrs. Hayes. Dr. Bennett turned to face her, his expression serious. I hired you because I needed help, and you were capable. Your past, your children, the circumstances that brought you here. None of that changes whether you can organize files and sterilize instruments. If Edmund Crowley, or anyone else in this town, wants to make an issue of it, that's their problem, not yours. The unexpected support made Clara's eyes sting with tears she refused to shed. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Crowley's right about one thing. There will be talk. Small towns thrive on gossip, and your arrival provided excellent material. He returned to his desk, gathering papers with brisk movements. But talk is just talk. It can't actually harm you unless you let it. Clara wasn't sure she believed that, but she appreciated the sentiment. She went back to organizing the medicine cabinet, listening to the familiar sounds of the twins stirring upstairs, their small cries signaling the end of nap time and the need for feeding. I should see to the babies. Of course. We're done for the day anyway. I don't have any more scheduled appointments until tomorrow morning. Dr. Bennett pulled out his watch, checking the time. It's nearly 6. I'll bring that cradle up before I head home. You don't live here? Clara had assumed the apartment had been his before his wife's death. I have a small house 3 streets over. Catherine and I lived there together. I kept the apartment above the office for nights when I had to stay close to a critical patient or when the weather was too severe to walk home. His expression shuddered. After she died, I couldn't bear to be in our house alone, so I stayed here for several months. But Margaret convinced me that hiding wasn't the same as healing, so I went back. Clara understood the impulse to flee from memories that hurt too much to face. Is it easier now, being there? No, he said honestly, but I'm told that eventually it will be. I'm choosing to believe that's true. There was nothing Clara could say to that, so she simply nodded and went upstairs to her waiting children, leaving Dr. Bennett alone with his ghosts. True to his word, Dr. Bennett brought the cradle up an hour later, hauling the beautiful handcrafted piece of furniture up the narrow stairs with Patrick's help. It was made of rich, dark wood with smooth rockers and posts carved with delicate flowers. Clara ran her fingers over the craftsmanship, imagining the hope that had gone into its creation, the future that had died with Dr. Bennett's wife and child. It's beautiful, she said softly. Catherine's father made it. Dr. Bennett's voice was rough. He was a carpenter in Boston, sent it out on the train as a gift when he learned she was expecting. He died before he got word that she was gone. The weight of that grief, generations of loss cascading through a single family, was almost unbearable. Clara touched his arm briefly, unable to find words adequate to the moment. He looked down at her hand, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes before he stepped back, re-establishing the professional distance between them. I should go, he said. I'll see you tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. After he left, Clara settled the twins in the cradle, watching them squirm and coo, blissfully unaware of the complicated world they'd been born into. Emma grabbed at James's hand and he wrapped his tiny fingers around hers, the gesture so pure and trusting that Clara's heart ached. We're going to be all right, she whispered to them. I promise you, whatever it takes, we're going to be all right. She only hoped she was telling them the truth. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that began to feel almost normal. Clara rose early, fed and changed the twins, brought them downstairs to the office in their basket. While they slept or played quietly, she organized patient files, cleaned instruments, prepared medications according to Dr. Bennett's precise instructions. When patients arrived, she greeted them, managed appointments, and gradually began assisting with minor procedures, holding bandages ready, passing instruments, taking notes on symptoms and treatments. Dr. Bennett proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but exacting, willing to explain the reasoning behind his medical decisions. Clara discovered she had an aptitude for the work, a steady hand and a calm demeanor that served her well even in difficult situations. When a ranch hand came in with a broken leg that needed setting, she held the man's shoulders while Dr. Bennett worked, speaking soothingly to distract him from the pain. When a child came in with a deep cut, she helped clean and stitch the wound, her fingers steady even though the sight made her stomach turn. "You're a natural," Dr. Bennett told her one afternoon, after they'd successfully delivered a baby in a difficult breech birth. The mother and child were both stable, sleeping peacefully in the office's recovery room while Clara cleaned up, washing blood from instruments with shaking hands. "I've had medical students who couldn't maintain their composure through half of what you handled today." Clara managed a weak smile. "I'm not sure composure is the right word. I thought I might faint twice." "But you didn't. That's what matters." He was cleaning his hands at the sink, his shirt sleeves rolled up, exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders. It had been a 14-hour day, starting with a pre-dawn emergency and ending with the difficult delivery. "You stayed focused, followed instructions perfectly, and quite possibly saved that baby's life with your quick thinking when the cord was wrapped." The praise warmed her more than it probably should have. Clara had spent months feeling useless, a burden, incapable of anything beyond basic survival. To be told she was actually good at something, that her work mattered, felt like water after a long drought. But her success at the medical practice came with a price. True to Crowley's prediction, there was talk in the town. Clara felt it every time she stepped outside the office. The stares that followed her down the street, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, the pointed way some women pulled their children aside as she passed. Margaret reported this gossip with a mixture of amusement and indignation when Clara visited the boarding house on her first day off. "They're saying you're after Dr. Bennett, trying to trap him into marriage the way you supposedly tried with Crowley. Never mind that you're working yourself to the bone caring for patients and managing that man's disaster of an office. Never mind that Lucas Bennett looks better than he has in months, actually eating properly now that someone's making sure he takes breaks. No, according to the town busybodies, you're a scheming temptress with two convenient babies who are probably not even yours." Clara felt her face drain of color. "They think I'm not the twins' mother? Oh, some of them have elaborate theories. You're a fallen woman who bought someone else's babies to make yourself appear respectable. You're a criminal fleeing from back east. You're working some long confidence scheme." Margaret snorted derisively. "People will believe the most ridiculous nonsense if it makes them feel superior. What if they convince Dr. Bennett I'm not worth the trouble?" "Lucas Bennett doesn't give a damn what people think. Never has." Margaret poured tea with brisk movements. "But I won't lie to you, Clara. The talk is making things harder for him. Some of his wealthier patients have stopped coming, preferring to travel to the next town for medical care rather than be treated in an office where you work. And there's been grumbling at the town council meetings about moral standards and propriety." Guilt gnawed at Clara's stomach. "Maybe I should leave. Find work somewhere else before I ruin his practice completely." "And go where?" "Do what?" Margaret fixed her with a stern look. "You've got a good position, honest work, and a safe place for your babies. You think it'll be easier anywhere else? At least here you've got Lucas Bennett standing with you, and you've got me. Don't you dare give up because some small-minded fools can't see past their own prejudices." But the pressure continued to mount. A delegation of 3 women appeared at the office one afternoon, led by Mrs. Henrietta Walsh, the wife of the town's wealthiest merchant. Clara was sterilizing instruments when they swept in, their skirts rustling with self-importance. "We need to speak with Dr. Bennett," Mrs. Walsh announced. "It's a matter of some urgency." Clara set down the scalpel she'd been cleaning. "He's with a patient at the moment. I'd be happy to—" "We'll wait for the doctor," Mrs. Walsh interrupted. "Our business doesn't concern you, though in a sense it concerns nothing but you." The casual cruelty in her tone made Clara's hands clench. Before she could formulate a response, Dr. Bennett emerged from the examination room, ushering out an elderly farmer with a bandaged hand. "Ladies," he said, his tone polite but wary, "what can I do for you, Mrs. Cows?" Walsh drew herself up like a general preparing for battle. "Dr. Bennett, we've come as representatives of the Ladies' Moral Improvement Society to express our concerns about your recent hiring practices." "My hiring practices?" Dr. Bennett's expression went carefully blank. "You mean Mrs. Hayes?" "We mean the impropriety of a widowed man employing a woman of questionable background in such close quarters, yes." Mrs. Walsh gestured dramatically toward Clara. "Surely you can see how this appears to the community. An unmarried woman, living above your office, working intimately alongside you." Mrs. Hayes is my medical assistant, Dr. Bennett said, his voice sharp as a scalpel. She lives in the apartment because it came with the position. She works alongside me because that's what assistants do. I fail to see any impropriety in a professional arrangement. Professional. One of the other women, Mrs. Garrett, said the word like it tasted sour. Dr. Bennett, that woman arrived in town claiming to be a mail-order bride, only to be revealed as a deceiver with illegitimate children. Now she's installed in your home for all practical purposes, and you expect us to believe nothing untoward is occurring? Clara felt her face burn, but before she could defend herself, Dr. Bennett stepped forward, his anger now clearly visible. First, Mrs. Hayes's children are not illegitimate. She was married to their father, who died of cholera. Second, she lives in a separate apartment above my office, not in my home. Third, what occurs or doesn't occur between my employee and myself is none of your business. It becomes our business when it affects the moral fabric of our community, Mrs. Walsh insisted. We have children to think of, Dr. Bennett, standards to maintain. Standards, Dr. Bennett repeated flatly. Let me tell you about standards, ladies. Mrs. Hayes maintains the standard of showing up for work every day, even when her children are fussy and she's had no sleep. She maintains the standard of treating every patient with respect and competence, whether they're wealthy or poor. She maintained the standard of staying calm and capable through a breech birth that would have killed both mother and child without her assistance. Those are the standards I care about. Mrs. Garrett's eyes widened. You allowed this woman to participate in a delivery? Doctor, that's highly irregular. What's irregular is 3 women with no medical training whatsoever presuming to tell a physician how to run his practice. Dr. Bennett's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do, as does Mrs. Hayes. Good day, ladies. He held the door open, making it clear they were being dismissed. Mrs. Walsh's face flushed an ugly red. The Ladies' Society will be taking this matter to the town council, Dr. Bennett. You can be assured of that. Do what you feel you must. He didn't move from the door. But know this, Mrs. Hayes's employment is not up for debate. Not by you, not by the council, not by anyone. Now please leave my office. They swept out in a rustle of indignation, and Dr. Bennett closed the door behind them with more force than necessary. He stood there for a moment, his hand on the doorknob, breathing hard. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly. I never meant to cause you this kind of trouble. He turned to face her, and she was surprised to see not anger in his expression, but something closer to shame. You're not the one causing trouble, Mrs. Hayes. They are. With their small minds and their vicious gossip and their determination to tear down anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of propriety. He moved to his desk, sitting heavily. Catherine used to say that the worst thing about small towns was how everyone felt entitled to police everyone else's business. I used to think she was being uncharitable. I was wrong. Clara twisted her hands together, weighing her next words carefully. Dr. Bennett, if my working here is going to damage your practice, your standing in the community, it won't. He looked up at her, his jaw set. Or rather, it might. But I don't care. I mean that literally, Mrs. Hayes. I don't care what Henrietta Walsh and her flock of harridans think. I don't care if the town council holds a formal debate on the subject. You're doing excellent work. You're learning quickly, and you're making my practice run more smoothly than it has in 2 years. That's what matters. But your patients, the patients who matter, the ones who actually need medical care rather than social approval, are still coming. Yes, I've lost some of the wealthier clients who can afford to be precious about propriety. But I've also treated more working families in the past 2 weeks than I did in the previous 2 months, because word has spread that there's a woman in the office who can help translate when my medical terminology confuses people, who has a gentle touch with children, who doesn't judge. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up in disarray. You're an asset, Mrs. Hayes. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The words settled over Clara like a blanket, warm and protective. She'd spent so long being made to feel like a burden, a problem to be solved, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be valued. Thank you, she managed, for defending me, for believing in me. I'm not defending you out of charity, he said, meeting her eyes. I'm defending you because you've earned it. There's a difference. That night, lying in her narrow bed with the twins sleeping peacefully in their cradle, Clara allowed herself to acknowledge a truth she'd been avoiding. She was beginning to care for Lucas Bennett as more than just an employer. Not romantically, or at least she didn't think it was romance, though she was too exhausted and emotionally fragile to entirely trust her own judgment on the matter. But there was a growing respect, a deepening appreciation for his integrity and kindness, for the way he'd stood up for her without hesitation. It was dangerous, she knew, allowing herself to feel anything beyond professional gratitude. He was still grieving his wife. She was still raw from losing Thomas. And the town was already convinced they were engaged in something improper. The last thing either of them needed was actual complicated feelings to add to the mix. But feelings, Claire was learning, didn't much care about what was needed or appropriate. They simply existed, inconvenient and undeniable. The town council meeting happened 3 days later, and Dr. Bennett came back from it with a thunderous expression and nothing to say beyond, "It's handled." Clara didn't press for details, though Margaret filled her in the next day with barely suppressed glee. Lucas stood up in front of the entire council and told them in no uncertain terms that his hiring practices were his own business, Margaret reported. When Crowley demanded that he either dismiss you or marry you to preserve appearances, Lucas said, and I quote, "I'll marry whomever I choose when I choose, and Edmund Crowley's wounded pride isn't a factor in that decision." Clara's heart stuttered. He didn't. Oh, he absolutely did. You should have seen Crowley's face, purple as a plum. Margaret laughed. Then Mayor Carson, bless him, pointed out that there's no actual law against a widower employing a widow, and that perhaps the council's time would be better spent on matters like fixing the road to the railway station rather than policing Dr. Bennett's household arrangements. So it's over? The official matter is over. The gossip will continue, of course. But you've weathered the worst of it, I think. Margaret studied Clara's face. The question is, what happens now? Clara didn't have an answer. What did happen now? She'd survived the initial crisis, proven herself capable in her work, earned Dr. Bennett's respect and Margaret's friendship. The twins were thriving, finally gaining weight on a regular diet of milk and solid food. She had a roof over her head and money in her pocket for the first time in months. But she was also acutely aware of the precariousness of her position. She was an employee, nothing more. If Dr. Bennett decided tomorrow that the trouble she brought wasn't worth the help she provided, she'd be out on the street again. She had no legal claim to her job, no real security beyond his continued goodwill. The answer came not from her own planning, but from an unexpected crisis. On a cold Tuesday morning, Dr. Bennett didn't arrive at the office at his usual 8 o'clock. Clara waited, growing concerned as the minutes ticked past. They had 2 patients scheduled for the morning, both already waiting in the office. At 9 o'clock, with still no sign of the doctor, Clara made a decision. She bundled the twins into their basket, instructed the patients to wait, and hurried the 3 streets to Dr. Bennett's house. She'd never been there before, had deliberately avoided even walking past it to respect his privacy. But something was wrong. She could feel it. The house was a neat, modest structure, painted white with blue shutters, a small garden gone dormant for winter in front. Clara knocked on the door, her heart pounding. No answer. She knocked again, harder. "Dr. Bennett? It's Clara Hayes. Are you all right?" A groan from inside. Clara tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. She pushed the door open, calling out as she entered. "Dr. Bennett, I'm coming in." She found him in the bedroom, half-dressed and clearly ill, his face flushed with fever, his eyes glassy. "Mrs. Hayes," he mumbled. "I'm sorry. I tried to get up. Can't seem to. Everything's spinning." Clara set the twins' basket down and moved to his bedside, pressing her hand to his forehead. He was burning up. "How long have you been sick?" "Started feeling poorly last night. Thought it was just tiredness." He tried to sit up and fell back with a groan. "There are patients waiting." "The patients can wait. Right now, you need medical attention." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Clara. The doctor who'd taken care of so many needed someone to take care of him. She went through his symptoms methodically, the way she'd watched him do with countless patients. Fever, chills, body aches, nausea, probably influenza. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to require bed rest and careful monitoring. I'm going to take care of you, she told him firmly. The way you'd take care of any patient. No arguments. He was too sick to argue. Over the next 3 days, Clara managed both the medical practice and Dr. Bennett's illness, running between his house and the office, treating minor ailments and rescheduling anything serious, making sure he stayed hydrated and took the medicines he'd prescribed for himself with a physician's dark humor about being a terrible patient. Margaret took the twins for the worst of it, giving Clara the freedom to focus entirely on nursing Dr. Bennett through the fever. And it was during those long hours, sitting beside his bed, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, listening to his fever rambling about Catherine and their lost baby, that Clara realized the full depth of what she'd come to feel for this complicated, grieving, honorable man. When the fever finally broke on the 4th day, Dr. Bennett woke clear-eyed and weak, finding Clara asleep in the chair beside his bed. He watched her for a long moment before speaking, his voice hoarse. "Clara!" She jerked awake, immediately alert. "You're lucid. How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a horse." He managed a weak smile. "How long have you been here?" 3 days, on and off. Margaret has the twins." She poured water from a pitcher on the nightstand, helping him sit up enough to drink. "You had us worried. The fever spiked quite high on the 2nd night. I have vague memories of you threatening to force-feed me broth if I didn't drink it voluntarily. You were a terrible patient." But Clara was smiling as she said it, relief washing over her. He was going to be all right. "The office is managed. Everything's under control." "Of course it is. You're managing it." He caught her hand as she pulled away, his grip weak but deliberate. "Thank you, Clara. I know this was beyond what you signed on for." "You stood up for me in front of the entire town council," she said quietly. "This was the least I could do." They stayed like that for a moment, hands clasped, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. Then Dr. Bennett released her hand, and the moment passed, though its echo lingered. It took another week for him to fully recover his strength, and during that time, something fundamental shifted between them. The formal distance eroded, replaced by an easy camaraderie born of crisis and mutual respect. He called her Clara instead of Mrs. Hayes. She called him Lucas when patients weren't present. They fell into comfortable rhythms, her anticipating what instruments he'd need before he asked, him trusting her judgment on patient scheduling and basic treatments. And the town began to notice. The whispers grew louder after Lucas's illness, fed by the fact that Clara had spent 3 days nursing him in his own home. Never mind that she'd been caring for a desperately sick man who had no one else. Never mind that Margaret Doyle had vouched for the absolute propriety of the arrangement. The gossip mill ground on, turning innocent facts into scandalous speculation with ruthless efficiency. Clara first became aware of how bad things had gotten when Mrs. Patterson, a regular patient who'd always been cordial, canceled her appointment with a terse note delivered by her housekeeper. Then Mr. Chen, who ran the general store, mentioned quietly while purchasing bandages that his wife had been receiving pressure from the Ladies' Moral Improvement Society to stop doing business with anyone who associated with that woman at the doctor's office. "I told her we need medical supplies regardless of town politics," Mr. Chen said, wrapping the bandages in brown paper. "But I thought you should know, Mrs. Hayes, there are those working actively against you." Clara thanked him for the warning, her stomach tight with anxiety. That evening, she mentioned the situation to Lucas while they cleaned instruments after the last patient had left. "It's getting worse," she said quietly. "I can feel it. The stares are harder. The whispers are louder. People are choosing sides, and I'm not sure how long the side defending me can hold." Lucas set down the scalpel he'd been sterilizing, his expression troubled. "Edmund Crowley has been making his rounds at the town council again. Margaret heard from Mayor Carson that he's pushing for some kind of formal inquiry into my household arrangements." "An inquiry?" Clara felt cold. "What kind of inquiry?" "The kind designed to humiliate you publicly while forcing me to choose between my practice and my principles." Lucas's jaw tightened. Crowley's framing it as concern for community standards. He's got Henrietta Walsh and her society behind him, plus several council members who owe him money or favors. "Then perhaps I should make the choice easier." Clara forced the words out past the tightness in her throat. "I could leave, find work in another town, somewhere no one knows about the stagecoach incident or the—" "No." Lucas turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense behind his spectacles. Absolutely not. You've done nothing wrong, Clara. Nothing except survive impossible circumstances with more grace and strength than most people could manage. I won't let Crowley and his cronies drive you away because they've decided you're a convenient target for their moral posturing. But your practice, my practice will be fine. The patients who matter are still coming. The ones who've stopped weren't coming for medical care anyway. They were coming for social validation. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I'm so damn tired of this town's hypocrisy. They'll ignore genuine suffering if the person suffering doesn't meet their standards of respectability. But they'll spend hours debating whether a widow working an honest job is somehow a threat to public morality. The passion in his voice stirred something in Clara's chest. Gratitude mixed with an emotion she wasn't quite ready to name. You've already sacrificed enough for me. I don't want you to sacrifice more. It's not sacrifice if I believe in what I'm fighting for. He held her gaze. And I believe in you, Clara. In your competence, your dedication, your right to build a life for yourself and your children without being persecuted for past circumstances beyond your control. Before Clara could respond, the office door burst open with enough force to make the bell clatter wildly. Edmund Crowley strode in, his face flushed with anger or exertion, followed by two men Clara recognized as town council members, Thomas Gardner and William Foster. Dr. Bennett, Crowley said without preamble, we need to speak with you, privately. Lucas's expression went carefully neutral. Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of Mrs. Hayes. She's my colleague. Colleague? Crowley's laugh was sharp and humorless. Is that what we're calling it now? What do you want, Edmund? Lucas's voice held a warning edge. Gardner, a thin man with nervous hands, cleared his throat. Dr. Bennett, the council has received numerous complaints about the situation here, about Mrs. Hayes living above your office, working in close quarters with you, the appearance of impropriety. We've had this conversation, Lucas interrupted. I told you then that my hiring practices are my own concern. That hasn't changed. The situation has changed, Foster interjected. He was a broad man with a florid face, owner of the town's lumber mill. We now have testimony that you and Mrs. Hayes were seen alone together in your private residence for extended periods, that she was observed entering and leaving your home at all hours, that she was in fact residing there for several days. Clara's hands clenched. Dr. Bennett was gravely ill. I was providing medical care. You're not a physician, Mrs. Hayes, Crowley said coldly. You're an unmarried woman spending nights in a widower's bedroom. There's a word for that arrangement, and it's not medical care. Lucas moved so quickly that Crowley actually stepped back. Be very careful with your next words, Edmund. Very careful. Or what? Crowley recovered his bravado quickly. You'll assault me? In front of witnesses? That would certainly help your case. Gentlemen, please. Gardner held up his hands placatingly. We're not here to make accusations or threats. We're here to present a solution that protects everyone's interests. I'm listening, Lucas said through gritted teeth. Foster pulled a document from his coat pocket. The council has drafted a resolution. It stipulates that Mrs. Hayes can continue her employment at the medical practice, but she must relocate to different housing. Separate residence, proper distance from your home and office. The council will even provide a small stipend to help with rent, given her circumstances. Clara felt something inside her crack. It was, objectively, a reasonable solution. More than reasonable. It was generous in its way. But it also felt like defeat, like being forced to accept shame for something that deserved none. And if I refuse? Lucas asked quietly. Then the council will be forced to consider more serious measures, Crowley said, satisfaction evident in his voice. We have the authority to suspend your medical license pending an investigation into professional misconduct. It would be unfortunate, of course. The town needs a physician, but we also need to maintain certain standards. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara watched Lucas's face, saw the war between pride and pragmatism playing out in his expression. She knew what it would cost him to back down, to give Crowley this victory, but she also knew the alternative, losing his ability to practice medicine, the work that was his life's purpose. I'll move, Clara said before Lucas could respond. I'll find other housing. It's not worth risking your practice over. Clara, they're right. The words tasted like ashes. Not about the impropriety. We've done nothing wrong, but about appearances. If moving to separate housing ends this circus, then it's a small price to pay. Crowley's smile was triumphant. A wise decision, Mrs. Hayes. I'm pleased to see you're capable of reason when properly motivated. Get out of my office, Lucas said, his voice dangerously quiet. All of you. Now. Gardner and Foster left quickly, clearly relieved to escape the tension. Crowley lingered, seeming to savor his victory. You should have married her when you had the chance, Bennett. Made everything official and proper. Now it's too late for that. The town's made its judgment. I said get out. After they'd gone, Lucas turned to Clara, his expression stricken. I'm sorry. I should have fought harder. You've fought enough. Clara's voice was steady despite the turmoil inside her. You've risked your reputation, your practice, your standing in this community. I won't let you risk more. But where will you go? You can't afford separate housing on what I'm paying you, even with their stipend. Margaret will know of something, a room somewhere, maybe sharing with another family. The thought of leaving the small apartment that had become home made Clara's chest ache, but she pushed the feeling aside. I'll manage. I always do. Lucas moved to his desk, sinking into the chair as though all the strength had drained from his body. This isn't right, Clara. None of this is right. No, she agreed, but right and wrong don't seem to matter much in Millbrook, do they? The next morning, Clara packed her few belongings while the twins played in their cradle, oblivious to the upheaval. Margaret had found her a solution, a tiny room in the back of the boarding house, barely large enough for a bed and the cradle, but clean and warm. The rent was manageable with the council's promised stipend, though Clara hated accepting anything that came from Edmund Crowley's maneuvering. Lucas helped her move, carrying her trunk down the stairs, with a grim determination that spoke to his anger more clearly than words. They made the short walk to Margaret's boarding house in silence, the late October wind carrying the first hints of the brutal winter to come. You'll still come to work tomorrow? Lucas asked as they set her trunk in the cramped room. Of course. They said I could keep my employment. That's what matters. Is it? He turned to face her, and she was startled by the intensity in his eyes. Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Her heart began to pound. All right. Do you want to leave? To find work elsewhere? Make a fresh start somewhere this whole mess hasn't followed you? He held up a hand before she could answer. I'm not asking if you feel obligated to stay. I'm asking what you actually want. Clara looked around the tiny room, then at her babies sleeping peacefully in their basket, then back at Lucas. What did she want? The question seemed almost absurd. For months she'd focused solely on survival, on getting through each day. Wants had seemed like luxuries she couldn't afford. But standing there, looking at this man who'd defended her again and again at cost to himself, she found she did know what she wanted. I want to stay, she said quietly. I want to keep working with you. I want to build something here, create a life for my children. I don't want to run anymore. Something in his expression softened. Then we'll find a way to make this work. Somehow. The weeks that followed were difficult. Living at Margaret's meant Clara had to wake earlier to make the walk to the office, bringing the twins in their basket through increasingly cold mornings. The arrangement was awkward and exhausting, but she made it work through sheer stubbornness. The town's attitude toward her remained hostile, though it had shifted from overt cruelty to cold distance. People would step aside when she passed on the boardwalk, their expressions carefully neutral. The Ladies' Moral Improvement Society held a tea to which every woman in town was invited, except Clara. Children whispered and pointed when they saw the twins, repeating whatever their parents had said at home. Only a few people remained consistently kind. Margaret, of course, who seemed to take personal offense at any slight directed at Clara. Mayor Carson and his wife, who made a point of greeting Clara warmly whenever they encountered her. Mr. Chen at the general store, who always had a kind word and sometimes slipped extra supplies into her packages without charging. And Lucas, who remained her steady anchor in the chaos. He increased her wages without being asked, citing her increased responsibilities and excellent work. He invited her to take meals with him when they worked late, cooking simple dinners in his kitchen while discussing cases and medical theories. He taught her more advanced techniques, trusting her with delicate procedures that would have been unthinkable for a woman without formal training in any other setting. They fell into an easy partnership that felt as natural as breathing. Lucas would begin examining a patient, and Clara would have the appropriate instruments ready without being asked. She would mention a symptom she'd noticed, and he would adjust his diagnosis accordingly. They developed a shorthand of looks and gestures that made their work seamless. And slowly, inevitably, that partnership began to deepen into something more. Clara noticed it first in small moments, the way her pulse quickened when Lucas smiled at her, the way she found herself looking for excuses to linger in the office after the last patient had left, the way his hand brushing hers while passing an instrument sent warmth through her entire body. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural affection that grew between colleagues who worked well together. But she knew she was lying to herself. What she felt for Lucas Bennett had grown far beyond professional respect. The realization terrified her. She was in no position to have feelings for anyone, least of all her employer. Her life was too precarious, too complicated. And Lucas was still grieving Catherine, still visiting her grave every Sunday, still wearing the wedding ring that proclaimed his continued devotion to a wife 18 months in the ground. But feelings, as Clara had already learned, didn't much care about logic or timing. The crisis came on a Thursday evening in mid-November. Clara was closing up the office while Lucas finished his notes on the day's patients. The twins were already asleep in their basket, and a heavy snow had begun falling outside, the first real storm of the season. "You should stay here tonight," Lucas said, glancing at the window where snow was rapidly accumulating. "That walk to Margaret's will be treacherous in this weather, and you have the babies to carry." Clara hesitated. Staying overnight would violate the council's resolution, would give the gossips fresh ammunition. But Lucas was right. Attempting the walk in a blizzard with 2 6-month-olds would be dangerous. "The apartment is still furnished," Lucas continued, not looking at her. "You could use it just for tonight. No one needs to know." "Lucas, if someone finds out," "How would they find out? No one's watching the office during a snowstorm." He finally looked up, his expression earnest. "Clara, please. I'd worry about you out there in this weather." The concern in his voice made her decision. "All right, just for tonight." She carried the twins upstairs to the apartment that had briefly been home, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and sadness. The rooms smelled faintly of dust and disuse, but they were warm and familiar. She settled the babies in their old cradle, tucking blankets around them, and was preparing to undress for bed when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Lucas appeared in the doorway carrying a tray. "I thought you might be hungry, and I made tea." He'd brought bread, cheese, cold chicken from his own kitchen. They sat at the small table, eating and talking quietly while the wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows. The intimacy of the moment, alone together, shut away from the world, sharing a simple meal, felt both dangerous and precious. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said eventually. "And you can tell me if it's too personal." "Ask." "Do you ever regret it? Taking me on, I mean. All the trouble it's caused, the problems with the council, losing patience. Do you ever wish you'd turned me away that first day?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "I've asked myself that question many times, and the honest answer is no, not once." "Even when Crowley threatened your license? Even then?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Clara, when you walked into my office that day with your babies and your dignity and your absolute refusal to be defeated by circumstances, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that life goes on, that there's still purpose to be found, still work worth doing, still reasons to get up in the morning beyond simple habit." Clara's throat tightened. "Lucas, let me finish." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I'd been sleepwalking through my days since Catherine died, going through the motions, treating patients because it was what I did, but feeling nothing. You changed that. You brought energy and life, and yes, complications, but also meaning. You made me care again about something beyond my own grief." The words hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Clara could feel the warmth of his hand on hers, could see the vulnerability in his eyes, could sense the shift in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. "I care about you," she said quietly. More than I should. More than is probably wise given everything. I know. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. I've tried to ignore it, to maintain proper boundaries. But Clara, I can't seem to stop caring about you, can't stop thinking about you, can't stop wanting... He broke off, pulling his hand back abruptly. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. Was it? Clara's heart was racing. Is it inappropriate to acknowledge feelings that exist whether we want them to or not? It is when I'm your employer, when you depend on me for your livelihood, your housing. Lucas stood, pacing to the window. There's a power imbalance here, Clara. I won't take advantage of that. What if I'm the one taking advantage? Clara stood as well, moving toward him. What if I'm the one who wants to acknowledge that what's between us has grown into something neither of us planned? He turned to face her, and the longing in his expression made her breath catch. Clara, if things were different, if we'd met under any other circumstances, I would already have asked to court you properly. But as it stands, anything between us would be seen as confirmation of everything the town's been saying. It would ruin you. The town already believes the worst of me. What do I have left to ruin? Your reputation, your ability to find other work if this doesn't work out, your children's futures. His hands clenched at his sides. I won't be responsible for destroying what you fought so hard to build. Clara recognized the nobility in his refusal even as it frustrated her. So what do we do? Pretend we feel nothing? Continue this careful dance around each other while the whole town watches and whispers? I don't know. The admission seemed torn from him. I don't have answers, Clara. I just know that I care too much about you to risk hurting you, even unintentionally. The moment stretched between them, full of longing and impossibility. Then Emma whimpered from the cradle, breaking the spell. Clara moved automatically to tend to her daughter, giving both of them an excuse to step back from the precipice they'd been teetering on. Lucas left shortly after, murmuring goodnight, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Clara lay awake long into the night, listening to the storm and thinking about all the ways her life had become impossibly complicated. The morning brought clear skies and 2 feet of snow. It also brought Edmund Crowley. Clara was preparing to leave for Margaret's, bundling the twins against the cold, when she heard voices downstairs. Angry voices. She crept to the top of the stairs, the babies in her arms, and listened. My own eyes, Bennett. I came by to check on the office after the storm, and I saw smoke from the apartment chimney. She spent the night here, didn't she? Mrs. Hayes was caught by the storm. It would have been dangerous for her to attempt the walk with 2 infants in that weather. How convenient. Crowley's voice dripped with satisfaction. You violated the council's resolution. That was the agreement. She maintained separate housing. Instead, she's right back where she started, living above your office. For 1 night, due to a weather emergency. The council won't see it that way. Neither will the rest of the town. There was a pause, then Crowley's voice again, colder now. You've left me no choice, Bennett. I'm calling for an emergency council meeting. This situation ends now. Clara descended the stairs slowly, the twins heavy in her arms. Both men turned to look at her, Crowley with triumph, Lucas with something close to despair. Mr. Crowley, Clara said, proud that her voice emerged steady. If you're determined to punish someone, punish me. Dr. Bennett has done nothing wrong. I'm the one who accepted his offer to stay during the storm. I'm the one who keeps causing problems for this town's delicate sensibilities. Whatever action the council wants to take, direct it at me. Crowley's smile was cold. Oh, I intend to, Mrs. Hayes. The emergency meeting is this afternoon. Both of you are expected to attend. The council will make its final determination about this entire sordid situation. He adjusted his hat, clearly pleased with himself. I'd suggest you prepare your defense carefully, though I doubt it will make much difference. After he left, Clara and Lucas stood in the cold office, the weight of impending judgment pressing down on them. This is my fault, Lucas said heavily. I should never have suggested you stay. I'm the one who agreed. Clara shifted the twins in her arms. Lucas, what's going to happen at this meeting? I don't know, but Edmund's had months to build his case, to gather support. And now he has evidence, or what appears to be evidence, of exactly what he's been accusing us of all along. What if they force you to choose, the practice or me? His expression was bleak. Then I'll have an impossible decision to make. The emergency council meeting was held in the town hall, a drafty building with hard wooden benches and windows that rattled in the wind. By the time Clara and Lucas arrived, the space was already packed. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the spectacle. Clara sat in the front row, the twins mercifully sleeping in their basket at her feet. Lucas sat beside her, his face a mask of professional composure, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the tight grip of his hands on his knees. The council filed in, 5 men, including Crowley, who looked entirely too pleased with himself. Mayor Carson took his seat at the center, his expression troubled as he called the meeting to order. We're here to address ongoing concerns about Dr. Bennett's household arrangements and employment practices, Carson began. Mr. Crowley has presented evidence that Mrs. Clara Hayes, despite the council's previous resolution requiring separate housing, spent last night in the apartment above Dr. Bennett's office. Mr. Crowley, please present your case. Crowley stood, and Clara felt her stomach drop. This was it. The moment her fragile new life would either survive or shatter completely. Crowley stood with the bearing of a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument, his eyes sweeping the crowded room before settling on Clara with undisguised contempt. Gentlemen of the council, citizens of Millbrook, we gather today to address a matter that strikes at the very heart of our community's values. For months, we have watched as Dr. Bennett has flouted basic standards of propriety by employing Mrs. Hayes in circumstances that invite scandal and disrepute. Clara felt Lucas stiffen beside her, but he remained silent, his jaw clenched. Crowley continued, warming to his subject. When this council generously offered a solution, allowing Mrs. Hayes to continue her employment while maintaining separate housing, we believed the matter resolved. We trusted Dr. Bennett's word as a gentleman and a professional. That trust, I regret to say, has been betrayed. He paused for effect, letting the murmur of disapproval ripple through the crowd. Last night, during the snowstorm, I took it upon myself to check on the medical office, concerned that the building might have suffered damage. What I discovered was smoke rising from the apartment chimney, the apartment that Mrs. Hayes had agreed to vacate. Further investigation this morning confirmed that she had, indeed, spent the entire night in that apartment, alone with Dr. Bennett, just 1 floor below. That's a deliberate mischaracterization of what happened, Lucas said, his voice cutting through the rising chatter. Mrs. Hayes was caught by the storm while closing the office. She had her 2 infant children with her. Walking to the boarding house in that weather would have been dangerous, potentially deadly. I offered her the use of the apartment, the empty apartment, to keep her and her babies safe. Nothing improper occurred. So you claim, Crowley shot back. But we have only your word for that, don't we? And your word, Dr. Bennett, has proven questionable given your continued association with a woman who came to this town under false pretenses, attempting to trap me into marriage while concealing the existence of her children. Clara could remain silent no longer. She rose to her feet, her voice carrying across the room with a strength that surprised even her. I have never concealed the truth about my children, Mr. Crowley. They were with me when I stepped off that stagecoach. They were visible to everyone, including you. What I concealed was mentioning them in my letters, which was wrong, and for which I have apologized. But I will not sit here and allow you to call them a trap or a trick or anything other than what they are. My son and daughter, born of a legitimate marriage to a good man who died too young. A shocked silence fell over the room. Women didn't interrupt council proceedings. They certainly didn't challenge men like Edmund Crowley in public forums. But Clara had spent months being talked about, talked over, and talked around. She was done being silent. Mrs. Hayes, Mayor Carson said, his tone conciliatory. Please, sit down. You'll have an opportunity to speak. Will I? Clara remained standing. Because it seems to me that this entire proceeding is designed to give Mr. Crowley an opportunity to air his grievances while Dr. Bennett and I are expected to sit quietly and accept whatever judgment this council hands down. Well, I'm tired of being quiet. Margaret Doyle, sitting 3 rows back, let out a bark of laughter that she quickly tried to muffle. A few others in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but Clara pressed on, her fear transforming into righteous anger. You want to talk about propriety and community standards? Then let's talk about them honestly. Let's talk about how this town welcomed me with suspicion and hostility from the moment I arrived. How the same women who preach charity and Christian kindness Wouldn't offer me a cup of water if I were dying of thirst. How I've been called a liar, a schemer, a woman of loose morals, all because I had the audacity to be widowed and desperate and willing to do whatever it took to keep my children alive. Clara, Lucas said quietly, but she shook her head. No, Lucas, they want a spectacle? They want their entertainment? Then let them have it. She turned back to the council, to Crowley's reddening face. I made one mistake in my letters to Mr. Crowley, one omission born of desperation and fear. For that, I have been judged, condemned, and treated as though I were some kind of criminal. Meanwhile, I have worked harder than anyone in this room can imagine. I have learned a profession from nothing. I have assisted Dr. Bennett in saving lives. Yes, saving lives. Ask Mrs. Patterson about the breech birth that would have killed her and her baby if I hadn't been there to help. Ask young Tommy Chen about the infection in his leg that Dr. Bennett treated while I held him still and kept him calm. Ask any of the dozen families who've come to the office in the past months whether I've treated them with anything less than respect and competence. Several people in the crowd were nodding now. Clara saw Mrs. Patterson in the back, her face troubled. Tommy Chen's mother sat near the front, her hand pressed to her mouth. The tide was shifting, she could feel it, but she wasn't done yet. You want to know what happened last night? I'll tell you. Dr. Bennett, who has been nothing but honorable in all his dealings with me, offered me shelter from a blizzard so that my babies wouldn't freeze to death on a walk through 2 feet of snow. I accepted because I'm their mother and their safety comes before my pride or your approval. I slept in the apartment with my children. Dr. Bennett slept in his own home 3 streets away, as he does every night. And if you want to make something scandalous out of that, then you're working much harder than I ever did to create scandal where none exists. She sat down abruptly, her legs suddenly weak, her hands trembling. Lucas reached over and briefly squeezed her hand, a gesture of support that did not go unnoticed by the watchful crowd. Crowley's face had gone from red to purple. This outburst only proves my point about Mrs. Hayes's character. A decent woman would never speak so boldly in a public forum. She would show proper deference and humility. A decent woman shouldn't have to defend her basic humanity, Margaret Doyle called out from her seat. But apparently in Millbrook, decency is measured by silence and submission rather than honesty and hard work. Mrs. Doyle, you are out of order, one of the other council members said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mayor Carson held up his hands for quiet. Let's maintain some decorum here. Mr. Crowley, you've presented your concerns. Dr. Bennett and Mrs. Hayes have responded. Does anyone else wish to speak before the council deliberates? To Clara's surprise, several hands went up. The first belonged to Mr. Chen, who stood nervously, his hat clutched in his hands. I just want to say that Mrs. Hayes has always been kind to my family. When my son was sick, she stayed late to make sure Dr. Bennett had everything he needed to treat him properly. She didn't charge us extra for her time. She even brought soup the next day to check on Tommy's recovery. That doesn't sound like someone with bad character to me. Mrs. Patterson stood next, her considerable bulk giving her words authority. I had complications with my last baby. A breech birth, like Mrs. Hayes said. Dr. Bennett told me afterward that without his assistant's quick thinking and steady hands, both my daughter and I would likely have died. I don't care what this woman did or didn't write in a letter months ago. I care that she saved my life and my baby's life. That matters more than Edmund Crowley's wounded pride. One by one, others stood. The blacksmith whose burned hand Clara had bandaged. The elderly widow whose chronic pain Lucas had been treating with Clara's carefully prepared tinctures. The young couple whose premature baby had survived thanks to round-the-clock care that both Lucas and Clara had provided. Each testimony chipped away at Crowley's narrative, revealing the truth that Clara had been too modest to speak herself, that she had become an integral part of the town's medical care, whether the town's elite wanted to acknowledge it or not. Crowley tried to interrupt, to refocus the discussion on propriety and regulations, but the momentum had shifted. Even the council members were looking uncomfortable, clearly reluctant to condemn someone who had apparently saved or helped so many of their constituents. Finally, Mayor Carson called for order again. The council needs to deliberate. We'll take a short recess and return with our decision. The 5 council members filed into a back room, leaving the crowd to buzz with speculation. Clara sat frozen, hardly daring to hope. Lucas leaned close, his voice low. Whatever happens, you were magnificent. The way you spoke up for yourself, Catherine would have loved you for that. The mention of his late wife in such a context startled Clara. There was no possessiveness in his voice, no sense that he was betraying Catherine's memory, just honest admiration and something deeper that made Clara's heart ache. Lucas, if they rule against you, if you lose your practice because of me, then we'll figure something out together. He held her gaze. I meant what I said, Clara. I'm not letting them drive you away, not without a fight. The council returned 15 minutes later, their faces grave. Mayor Carson remained standing as the others took their seats. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the mayor. This has been a difficult matter to adjudicate, Carson began. The council has heard concerns about propriety and community standards, balanced against testimony about Mrs. Hayes's valuable contributions to our town's medical care. We've considered the specific incident that prompted this meeting, Mrs. Hayes spending the night in the office apartment during the blizzard, and Dr. Bennett's explanation for that decision. Clara held her breath. Beside her, Lucas sat rigid with tension. After careful deliberation, the council has reached the following conclusions. First, we find that Dr. Bennett's decision to offer shelter during a dangerous storm was reasonable and does not constitute a violation of our previous resolution. The safety of 2 infant children outweighs concerns about technical compliance with housing arrangements. A collective exhale moved through the supportive portion of the crowd. Crowley's face darkened, but Carson continued before he could interrupt. However, the council also recognizes that the current situation remains problematic. The perception of impropriety, regardless of the reality, continues to cause division in our community. Therefore, we propose the following solution. He paused, and Clara's nails dug into her palms. Dr. Bennett, the council believes it would be in everyone's best interest if you were to regularize your household arrangements. Specifically, if you were to make Mrs. Hayes's position in your home official and permanent through marriage. The room erupted. Clara felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. Lucas stood abruptly, his face white with shock. You're ordering me to marry her? His voice carried over the chaos. We're strongly suggesting it as the most practical solution to ongoing concerns, Carson clarified. It would silence all questions about propriety, provide Mrs. Hayes and her children with the security they deserve, and allow both of you to continue the valuable work you're doing without constant scrutiny and interference. This is outrageous, Crowley sputtered. You can't force a man to marry. We're not forcing anything, another council member interjected. We're presenting it as an option. The alternative is that we must take more serious action to address community concerns. Dr. Bennett would have to dismiss Mrs. Hayes from his employment, and she would need to leave Millbrook entirely to avoid continued scandal. Clara found her voice. So the choice is marriage or exile. Those are my options. Mrs. Hayes, please understand, Carson began, but Clara cut him off. I understand perfectly, Mayor. The council has decided that a woman can only exist in this town as either a wife or an outcast. There's no room for me to simply be a competent professional trying to support my children. She stood gathering the twins' basket with shaking hands. Thank you for making your position so clear. She walked out of the town hall with her head high, refusing to let anyone see the tears burning behind her eyes. Behind her, she heard Lucas calling her name, heard the renewed chaos of the council meeting dissolving into argument, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. If she stopped, she would shatter completely. Margaret caught up with her halfway to the boarding house. Clara, wait. Just wait a moment. I can't, Margaret. I can't stand there and listen to them debate my future like I'm a problem to be solved rather than a person. I know, dear, I know. Margaret fell into step beside her, her presence solid and comforting. But you need to think about what happens next, because like it or not, you have decisions to make. They reached the boarding house and went up to Clara's small room. Margaret took the twins while Clara paced, her emotions a roiling storm of anger, humiliation, and something that might have been grief. They want Lucas to marry me, Clara said finally, to legitimize the scandal by making it respectable, as though marriage is some kind of magical solution that erases everything that's happened. To be fair, it would solve several practical problems, Margaret pointed out gently. You'd have security, the children would have a father, Lucas would have a wife and full-time help with his practice. And yes, it would silence the gossips. But it would be a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement to satisfy the town council. Clara stopped pacing, pressing her hands against the cold window glass. I won't trap Lucas into that. I won't be the second wife he married out of obligation rather than love. Are you so sure it would be just obligation? Margaret's voice was quiet. Clara, I've watched you two together for months now. I've seen the way he looks at you, the way you look at him. That's not just professional respect. It doesn't matter what we feel, Clara said desperately. A marriage forced by the town council under threat of exile and ruin, how could that be anything but poisoned from the start? A knock at the door interrupted them. Margaret opened it to reveal Lucas, snow dusting his shoulders, his face drawn with exhaustion and emotion. May I speak with Clara, please? Margaret looked at Clara, who nodded reluctantly. Margaret gathered the twins. I'll take these two down to the kitchen for a bit, give you some privacy. After she left, Lucas and Clara stood in the cramped room, the weight of the council's ultimatum hanging between them like a physical presence. I didn't ask for this, Lucas said finally. I want you to know that. I never asked the council to pressure you into marriage. I know. But they're not wrong about one thing. The current situation is unsustainable. Probably won't stop. He'll keep finding ways to attack you, to undermine your position, until either you leave or... He trailed off. Or you dismiss me to protect your practice. Clara finished the thought. I understand, Lucas. I've always understood the precariousness of my position here. That's not what I was going to say. He moved closer, his eyes intense behind his spectacles. Clara, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without the council's ultimatum clouding everything. Can you do that? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I care about you. Not as an employer cares about an employee, not as a colleague appreciates a partner, but as a man cares about a woman he's come to admire and respect, and yes, love. The last word came out rough, as though it hurt to speak it. I've tried not to feel this way, tried to maintain proper boundaries, to honor Catherine's memory, to protect you from any more complications, but I can't seem to help it. You've become important to me, Clara. Essential, even. Clara's breath caught. Lucas, let me finish, please. He ran a hand through his hair. If I were to ask you to marry me, it wouldn't be because the council demanded it. It wouldn't be to solve a political problem or silence gossip. It would be because I want to build a life with you, because I want to wake up every morning knowing you're there, because I want to help raise your children and maybe, if you're willing, have more together, because the thought of you leaving Millbrook, of never seeing you again, is unbearable. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but she didn't bother wiping them away. How can you be sure? How can you know this isn't just the council's pressure making you think you feel something you don't? Because I've been thinking about asking you for weeks, he said simply. Long before Crowley ever called this meeting, I've been trying to find the right words, the right moment, trying to figure out how to tell you without making you feel obligated or pressured. The council's interference has made everything messier, but it hasn't changed what I feel. Clara moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered street. I'm not Catherine. I can't be her replacement. I'm not asking you to be. Lucas came to stand beside her. Catherine was my first love, and I'll always carry her memory, but you're not a replacement, Clara. You're something entirely different, something new and unexpected and precious in its own right. I have 2 children, children who aren't yours, who will need attention and care, and I already love them, Lucas interrupted. Emma with her serious little face, James with his curious eyes, they're part of you, which makes them part of what I'm asking for. Clara turned to face him, searching his expression for any sign of doubt or obligation. She found only sincerity and a vulnerability that matched her own. I'm afraid, she admitted. I'm afraid of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong person, of building something that falls apart. I'm afraid too, Lucas said. I'm afraid of dishonoring Catherine's memory, of being a poor husband the second time around, of not being enough for you and the children. But Clara, being afraid isn't a reason to say no. Sometimes the things most worth having are the ones that scare us most. The council gave us an ultimatum, marriage or exile. How can I say yes without wondering if that's the only reason you're asking? Lucas took both her hands in his grip warm and steady. Then let me be completely clear. Edmund Crowley and his council can go to hell. Their ultimatum means nothing to me. If you say no, if you tell me you don't feel the same way, then I'll find another solution. I'll hire you a lawyer to fight the exile order. I'll testify that you're essential to my practice. I'll move heaven and earth to let you stay in Millbrook on your own terms. But Clara, I'm asking you to marry me not because of them, but in spite of them. I'm asking because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, irrevocable and true. Clara felt something inside her chest crack open, all the fear and grief and loneliness of the past months finally giving way to something that felt terrifyingly like hope. I love you too, she whispered. I've tried not to. Tried to keep it professional and proper. But I love you, Lucas. I love your dedication and your kindness and the way you fought for me when no one else would. I love how gentle you are with patience and how patient you are when teaching me. I love that you still visit Catherine's grave because it means you know how to honor the people you've loved. I even love your terrible handwriting and the way you forget to eat when you're focused on a difficult case. He laughed, the sound breaking the tension, and pulled her into his arms. Clara went willingly, resting her head against his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her cheek. Is that a yes? He asked softly. It's a yes. She pulled back to look up at him. But Lucas, I need you to understand something. I won't marry you if it means I have to stop working. I won't become just a wife who keeps your house and raises your children. I need the medical work. I need to feel useful and capable and part of something important. I wouldn't dream of asking you to stop, Lucas said. Clara, you're the best assistant I've ever had. You're a natural healer. If anything, I want to teach you more, help you develop your skills. Maybe someday you could even... He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. What? There are medical schools in the East that have started accepting women. It's still rare, still controversial, but it's possible. If you wanted to pursue formal training to become a physician in your own right, I would support that. Encourage it even. The idea was so enormous, so unexpected that Clara could barely process it. Her, a physician? It seemed impossible, laughable, and yet standing there in Lucas's arms, it also seemed almost within reach. One step at a time, she said shakily. First, let's get married and scandalize the town council. We can worry about medical school later. Lucas smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since the council meeting. Practical as always. It's one of the many things I love about you. He leaned down and kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Clara felt the last of her resistance crumble. This was right. Not perfect, not simple, but right in a way that went deeper than logic or convenience. When they finally broke apart, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. I should probably ask you properly, with a ring and everything. You don't have a ring. I have Catherine's ring. She would want you to have it, I think. She was generous like that. His voice caught slightly. But if you'd prefer something different, something that's just yours. Catherine's ring would be perfect, Clara said firmly. I'm not trying to erase her or replace her. I'm trying to build something new that honors what came before while moving forward. Her ring would be a symbol of that. They stood together in the small room, holding each other while the snow continued to fall outside, and Clara felt a peace she hadn't known since before Thomas died. She was still frightened of the future, still aware of all the ways this could go wrong. But for the first time in months, she was also hopeful. More than hopeful. She was certain that whatever came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. Margaret returned with the twins an hour later, took one look at Clara and Lucas's intertwined hands and tear-streaked faces, and grinned broadly. Well, it's about damn time. I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other until you were both in your graves. We're getting married, Clara said, and saying the words out loud made them real in a way they hadn't been before. Lucas asked me properly, without the council's pressure, and I said yes. Of course you did. Anyone with eyes could see you were meant for each other. Margaret handed Emma to Clara and James to Lucas, who took the baby with surprising confidence. Now, when's the wedding? Because I'm assuming you'll want to do this quickly before Crowley can cause any more trouble. As soon as possible, Lucas agreed. Mayor Carson can perform the ceremony. Tomorrow, if he's available. Tomorrow, Clara repeated, feeling dizzy. Less than 24 hours from now, she would be married again. Would be Mrs. Lucas Bennett instead of Mrs. Clara Hayes. Would have a husband, a home, a future that extended beyond simple survival. Too fast? Lucas asked, watching her face with concern. No, Clara said firmly. Not too fast, just right. That evening, they walked together to Lucas's house, so Clara could see where she'd be living. The home was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a parlor, a kitchen, and a small study filled with medical books. Catherine's presence was still evident, in the needlework cushions on the chairs, the china in the cabinet, the photograph on the mantel showing a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Clara studied the photograph while Lucas lit the fire in the hearth. She was beautiful. She was, and she was good. Much better than I deserved, probably. Lucas came to stand beside her. I want to keep her picture out, if that's all right with you. I don't want to hide her away as though she never existed. Of course it's all right. She was part of your life, part of what made you who you are. Clara touched the frame gently. I hope she would approve of me. She would have loved you, Lucas said with certainty. You're both strong women who refuse to be defeated by circumstances. You would have been friends, I think. They spent the evening making practical plans. Lucas would speak to Mayor Carson first thing in the morning about performing the ceremony. Margaret would serve as witness and would watch the twins during the brief service. They would have a simple wedding with no fuss, no celebration, nothing that could give the town more fodder for gossip. Though we should probably inform the council, Lucas said dryly, since our marriage was their idea, after all. Let Crowley hear about it secondhand, Clara said with more vindictiveness than she usually allowed herself. Let him find out after it's done, when he can't interfere or try to control the situation. Lucas grinned. I like the way you think, Mrs. Hayes. Or should I start calling you Mrs. Bennett to be? The next morning dawned clear and cold. Clara dressed in her best dress, the gray wool she'd worn on the stagecoach, now carefully cleaned and pressed. It wasn't a wedding dress by any stretch, but it was all she had. Margaret had lent her a simple strand of pearls and helped her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than usual. You look beautiful, Margaret said, adjusting the last pin. And more importantly, you look happy. Clara studied her reflection in the small mirror. Her face was thinner than it had been 6 months ago, marked by hardship and grief. But there was also a light in her eyes that had been missing for a long time. I am happy, terrified, but happy. That's the right combination for a bride, I think. They walked to the mayor's office together, Margaret carrying the twins while Clara tried to calm her racing heart. Lucas was already waiting, wearing his best suit and looking nearly as nervous as Clara felt. Mayor Carson had agreed to perform the ceremony in his office, offering congratulations mixed with obvious relief that the council's problem was being resolved. The ceremony itself was brief and simple. Carson read the traditional vows while Clara and Lucas faced each other, hands clasped, speaking words that bound them legally and emotionally. Lucas slipped Catherine's ring onto Clara's finger, a simple gold band that fit perfectly, as though it had been meant for her all along. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Carson said. Dr. Bennett, you may kiss your bride. Lucas cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, and Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. But these were happy tears, tears of relief and joy and the overwhelming sense that she had finally found safe harbor after months adrift in stormy seas. Margaret dabbed at her own eyes as they signed the marriage certificate. Well, Mrs. Bennett, welcome to the family of women who've had to fight for every inch of happiness we've got. You're in good company. They walked out of the mayor's office as husband and wife just as Edmund Crowley was walking in. He stopped dead when he saw them, his eyes going to Clara's left hand where Catherine's ring gleamed in the winter sunlight. You married her, he said to Lucas, his voice strangled. You actually married her. I did, Lucas said calmly. As the council suggested, though I should thank you, Edmund. Without your meddling and your ultimatums, I might have taken months longer to work up the courage to propose. You did me a favor, really. Crowley's face flushed dark red. This isn't over, Bennett. Marriage doesn't erase everything she's done, everything she is. Actually, Edmund, it does. Clara is now my wife, a physician's wife, with all the respectability and social standing that entails. Any attack on her is an attack on me and on my practice. I trust you'll consider that before opening your mouth again. Lucas's voice was mild, but there was steel beneath it. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a marriage to celebrate. Good day? He offered Clara his arm and they walked away, leaving Crowley sputtering in impotent rage. Clara couldn't quite suppress her smile. That felt good, she admitted. It did, didn't it? Lucas grinned down at her. Come on, Mrs. Bennet. Let's go home. Home. The word settled over Clara like a blessing. After months of uncertainty and fear, of being unwanted and judged and rejected, she finally had a home again. A husband who loved her, a purpose that fulfilled her, a future that held promise instead of just survival. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she stepped off that stagecoach 6 months ago. It was better. Moving into Lucas's house felt both strange and natural at the same time. Clara stood in the doorway of what had been Catherine's bedroom, watching as Lucas carefully packed away his late wife's belongings, not hiding them, but making space for the living while honoring the dead. You don't have to do this all at once, Clara said softly, holding Emma while James dozed in the cradle they'd brought from the office. I don't want you to feel like you're erasing her. I'm not erasing her. I'm making room for you. Lucas folded a delicate shawl with careful hands. Catherine would understand. She was practical about these things. She'd want her dresses to go to women who need them, her jewelry to be worn rather than locked away. He paused, holding up a beautiful blue silk gown. Margaret might know someone who could use this. They worked together through the afternoon, sorting and packing, creating space in the wardrobe and dresser for Clara's meager belongings. It was intimate work, this blending of lives, and Clara found herself sharing stories about Thomas as Lucas talked about Catherine, the two of them weaving their histories together into something that honored both past and present. He used to sing to me, Clara said, running her hand over one of Thomas's shirts she'd kept. Terribly off-key, but so earnest. He'd make up silly songs about whatever I was cooking for dinner or how the laundry was taking too long to dry. Her throat tightened with the memory. I miss that. The ordinary moments. Catherine collected recipes, Lucas said, pulling a battered notebook from a drawer. Hundreds of them, written in her terrible handwriting. She'd try new dishes constantly, convinced she could cook anything if she just had the right instructions. Half of them were disasters. He smiled, but his eyes were sad. I kept burning the food after she died because I couldn't bear to look at her recipes. Couldn't stand the reminder of all those dinners we'd never share. Clara took the notebook gently, paging through the careful notations, the ingredient lists, the optimistic notes Catherine had made. Maybe we could try some together. Honor her by actually using what she left behind. Lucas's expression softened. I'd like that. By evening, the bedroom had transformed from a shrine to the past into a space for their future. Clara's dresses hung beside Catherine's remaining things, the items Lucas wanted to keep for sentimental value. The twins' cradle sat near the window where it would catch morning light. On the dresser, Catherine's photograph remained in its place of honor, but now it was joined by the small daguerreotype of Thomas that Clara had carried across the country. Look at us, Lucas said, studying the two photographs side by side. Building a family from grief. Maybe that's the only kind of family worth building, Clara replied. The kind that knows how precious and fragile life is. The kind that doesn't take a single day for granted. That night, their first as husband and wife, they lay in the darkness talking about dreams and fears and the future they were creating together. Lucas held her close, his arms a refuge she was still learning to trust, and Clara allowed herself to believe that perhaps the worst was finally behind them. She should have known better. The trouble started 3 days after the wedding, when Clara accompanied Lucas to the office for their first day of work as a married couple. They arrived to find the door standing open, the lock broken, and the interior ransacked. Files were scattered across the floor, medicine bottles smashed, instruments scattered and bent. Someone had torn through the space with deliberate malice, destroying months of careful organization. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the devastation. Who would do this? Lucas's face had gone white with rage. I can make an educated guess. He picked up a broken retractor, examining the bent metal. These instruments were expensive. This wasn't random vandalism. This was personal. They spent hours cleaning up, salvaging what they could and making lists of what needed to be replaced. The financial loss was significant. Several $100s worth of equipment and medications destroyed. But worse than the material damage was the message it sent. Someone in Millbrook hated Clara enough to strike at her through Lucas's practice. Mayor Carson arrived mid-morning, summoned by a concerned neighbor who'd seen the broken door. He surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "I'll investigate, of course. But Dr. Bennett, between you and me, I doubt we'll find who did this. Whoever it was knew what they were doing. They were careful. Careful enough not to be caught, but not careful enough to hide their motive," Lucas said bitterly. "This happened 3 days after our marriage. The timing isn't coincidental." Carson sighed heavily. "I warned the council that forcing your hand might cause backlash. Edmund Crowley has influential friends, and not all of them are pleased about how this situation resolved." "So what?" Clara found her voice, anger overriding her shock. "We're supposed to accept this? Accept that someone can destroy property and threaten our livelihood because they don't approve of our marriage? I'm not saying accept it. I'm saying be realistic about what I can prove versus what we all know happened." Carson adjusted his hat uncomfortably. "I'll do what I can, Mrs. Bennett, but in a town this size, with loyalties this complicated, justice isn't always straightforward." After he left, Clara and Lucas continued cleaning in silence. The weight of the situation pressed down on them, the realization that their marriage, rather than solving their problems, had potentially made them worse. "Maybe I should leave," Clara said finally. "Go to another town, somewhere you're not known. The twins and I could start fresh, and you could rebuild your practice without this cloud hanging over you." Lucas stopped what he was doing and crossed to where she stood, taking her shoulders firmly. "Clara Bennett, if you think I'm letting you walk away 3 days after our wedding, you're out of your mind. We're in this together. For better or worse, remember? We just hit worse a bit sooner than expected. But your practice can be rebuilt. Instruments can be replaced. Files can be reorganized." His grip gentianed, his thumbs stroking her shoulders. "What can't be replaced is you, us, this family we're building. I won't sacrifice that because some coward broke a few bottles." Clara leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. "I'm scared, Lucas. I'm scared this is just the beginning, that whoever did this won't stop until they've destroyed everything we're trying to build." "Then we'll be ready for them." Lucas kissed her forehead. "And we won't face it alone. We have allies too. Margaret, the Carsons, all the families you've helped. Those voices matter as much as the ones against us." He was right, as it turned out. Word of the vandalism spread quickly, and by afternoon people began arriving at the office with donations. Mr. Chen brought replacement bandages and supplies from his store, refusing payment. Mrs. Patterson and 3 other women showed up with cleaning supplies and helped scour the floors and walls. The blacksmith appeared with new locks for the door, installing them himself while muttering darkly about cowards who couldn't face a man directly. Margaret arrived with a basket of food and a look of fierce determination. "I've been asking around, calling in favors, twisting arms. By tomorrow I'll have a list of everyone who wasn't in their bed the night this happened. It's a small town, Clara. Secrets don't keep well here." True to her word, Margaret returned the next evening with information. She sat in Lucas and Clara's kitchen, drinking coffee while the twins played on a blanket nearby, and laid out what she'd learned. 3 men were seen near the office late that night: Ben Foster, William Foster's son, Tom Gardner, the councilman's nephew, and a drifter who's been doing odd jobs for Edmund Crowley. Margaret's expression was grim. "I can't prove they did it, but they were in the area when they shouldn't have been, and all 3 have connections to people who opposed your marriage." Lucas's jaw tightened. The Foster and Gardner families have been influential in this town for generations. Even if we had proof, getting justice against their sons would be nearly impossible. "So we do nothing?" Clara's voice was sharp with frustration. "No," Lucas said slowly. "We do something smarter than seeking official justice. We make it clear that attacking us has consequences." Over the next week, Lucas began making house calls to families throughout the region. Families who'd been patients of his for years, families who owed him debts of gratitude. He spoke quietly with fathers and grandfathers, respected men whose opinions carried weight. He didn't accuse anyone directly, but he made it known that the destruction of his practice had hurt not just him, but the entire community's access to medical care. Clara, meanwhile, began documenting everything. Every patient they'd treated, every life they'd saved or improved, every instance of compassion and competence. She created a detailed record of their work, organized by family and dated precisely. It was evidence of their value to Millbrook, proof that they were assets rather than problems. The shift in town sentiment was gradual but unmistakable. The families Lucas had visited began speaking up in the general store, at church, in the saloons. They spoke about the time doctor. Bennett had ridden through a blizzard to deliver their baby, or stayed up all night treating their father's pneumonia, or set their son's broken leg with such skill that it healed perfectly. And increasingly they spoke about Mrs. Bennett, the doctor's wife, who'd assisted in complicated procedures, who'd shown such patience with frightened children, who'd never turned away a patient regardless of their ability to pay. Edmund Crowley found himself increasingly isolated. His attempts to continue agitating against Claire were met with polite but firm resistance from people who'd once supported him. When he tried to bring another motion before the town council, Mayor Carson shut it down before discussion could even begin. "The matter is settled, Edmund," Carson said firmly. "Dr. Bennett and his wife are married. They're contributing members of this community. Unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, and I mean evidence, not speculation or gossip, I suggest you focus your energy elsewhere." The turning point came 6 weeks after the wedding, during a bitterly cold February night when a wagon accident left 4 men injured, 2 of them critically. Lucas and Clara worked through the night in the office, setting broken bones, stitching deep lacerations, fighting to save a man with internal bleeding who would surely have died without immediate intervention. By dawn, all 4 men were stable. Their families, gathered in the waiting room, wept with relief and gratitude. One of the wives, Mrs. Foster, mother of Ben Foster, who'd likely been involved in the vandalism, approached Clara with tears streaming down her face. "You saved my husband's life," she said hoarsely. "Both of you. Tom would have died if you hadn't known exactly what to do." She grasped Clara's hands. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything, for what people said about you, for how you've been treated. You're a good woman, Mrs. Bennett, a skilled healer. This town is lucky to have you." The apology was public and sincere, witnessed by a dozen people who'd gathered to check on the accident victims. Within days, the story had spread throughout Millbrook, not just of Lucas's surgical skill, but of Clara's calm competence, her steady hands, her crucial assistance during the critical hours when life hung in the balance. Even Henrietta Walsh, leader of the Ladies' Moral Improvement Society, was forced to acknowledge Clara's contributions. She appeared at the office one afternoon, her posture stiff with residual disapproval, but her words carefully chosen. "Mrs. Bennett, I've come to express the Society's gratitude for your work during the wagon accident. It's clear that you've developed considerable medical knowledge. The Society would like to invite you to give a talk on basic first aid at our next meeting." It was an olive branch offered with obvious reluctance, but genuine nonetheless. Clara accepted graciously, recognizing the political significance of the gesture. If the Ladies' Moral Improvement Society endorsed her, the last holdouts of opposition would have little ground to stand on. The talk, given in late February to a room full of women who'd once whispered about her disgracefully, was a triumph. Clara spoke clearly and confidently about treating burns, recognizing signs of infection, managing childhood fevers. She demonstrated proper bandaging techniques and explained when to seek a physician's care versus when home treatment was sufficient. The women listened intently, asking intelligent questions, and by the end of the hour, Clara could see the shift in how they looked at her. Not as a scandalous interloper, but as a valuable resource. Afterward, Henrietta Walsh approached her privately. "You're a skilled teacher, Mrs. Bennett. Perhaps you might consider offering regular classes. There's certainly need for better medical knowledge in this community." "I'd be happy to discuss it with my husband," Clara said diplomatically. "It would need to fit around our practice schedule, of course." "Of course," Walsh hesitated, then added stiffly, "I may have been hasty in my initial judgment of you. It appears I was wrong." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close enough. Clara accepted it with grace, recognizing that Walsh was offering what pride would allow. Spring came early that year, bringing with it a thawing of more than just frozen ground. The medical practice flourished, busier than it had been in years. Clara's classes in basic first aid became a regular monthly event, attended not just by women, but increasingly by men who recognized the value of emergency medical knowledge. Lucas began talking seriously about Clara pursuing formal medical education, going so far as to write to several Eastern schools that had begun accepting female students. "You could study for a year, maybe two," he said one evening, spreading brochures across their kitchen table while the twins crawled on the floor nearby. Emma had just learned to pull herself up, and she clung to her father's pant leg, burbling happily. "I could manage the practice here, and you could come back with proper credentials. Think of it, Clara, Dr. Clara Bennett, one of the first female physicians in the territory." The idea was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "What about Emma and James? They're still so young." "They could come with you. Or stay here with me and Margaret. There are options." Lucas pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm not saying it would be easy, but when has anything worthwhile ever been easy for us?" Clara leaned back against his chest, watching their children play. James had stolen one of Emma's wooden blocks, and she was protesting loudly. They'd grown so much in the past months, becoming sturdier and more vibrant. They looked like Thomas still, but increasingly they were becoming their own people. Emma, bold and determined, James, curious and gentle. "Let me think about it," Clara said. "It's such a big decision. Take all the time you need. The opportunity isn't going anywhere." Lucas kissed her temple. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." The decision was made for her in early April, when a measles outbreak swept through Millbrook. Children fell ill by the dozens, and within days, Lucas and Clara were overwhelmed with patients. They worked around the clock, treating fevers, monitoring for complications, educating parents on isolation procedures. Clara moved through the sick rooms with quiet efficiency, her calm presence reassuring terrified mothers, her growing medical knowledge saving lives that might otherwise have been lost. It was during those exhausting weeks that Clara realized something fundamental about herself. She didn't just assist Lucas in his medical practice. She was a healer in her own right, with instincts and skills that deserved to be fully developed. The idea of formal medical training shifted from an intimidating possibility to an absolute necessity. "I want to do it," she told Lucas one night after they'd finally returned home, both too exhausted to do more than collapse into bed. "I want to study medicine properly. Not just learn by watching you, but actually understand the theory and science behind what we do." Lucas smiled, pulling her close despite their mutual exhaustion. "Then we'll make it happen. Whatever it takes." But before those plans could materialize, one final confrontation needed to happen. Edmund Crowley, increasingly marginalized and bitter, made one last attempt to undermine Clara's position in the community. He appeared at one of her first aid classes in May, interrupting her demonstration on treating snake bites to loudly question her qualifications. "On what authority does this woman presume to teach medical procedures?" he demanded, addressing the assembled ladies. "She has no formal education, no credentials beyond whatever her husband has taught her. Are we really comfortable placing our trust in someone so unqualified?" The room fell silent. Clara stood at the front, her hand steady on the cloth dummy she'd been using for demonstration, her heart pounding but her expression calm. Before she could formulate a response, Henrietta Walsh stood. "Mr. Crowley, with all due respect, you have no place in a ladies' society meeting. This is a women's gathering. I'm here as a concerned citizen." "You're here to cause trouble," Margaret Doyle interrupted, rising from her seat. "Just like you've been causing trouble since the day Clara arrived in Millbrook. Well, we're done listening to you, Edmund, done letting you bully good people because your pride was wounded." Other women began standing, one by one, a show of solidarity that left Crowley visibly shaken. Mrs. Patterson stood, her substantial frame imposing. Mrs. Chen stood, her quiet dignity speaking volumes. Even Mrs. Foster stood, the woman whose husband Clara had helped save. "Mrs. Bennett has proven her worth 100 times over," Mrs. Foster said firmly. "She's skilled, knowledgeable, and dedicated to helping this community. Those are her qualifications, Mr. Crowley, and they're more than sufficient for us." Crowley looked around the room at the sea of standing women, his face flushing dark red. You're all fools. She's manipulated you, made you think. The only one who's been manipulated is you, Edmund, Henrietta Walsh said coldly, by your own pride and prejudice. Now please leave. You're disrupting our class. He left, his exit lacking the dignity he'd clearly hoped for, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. This was it. The moment when the town had finally, definitively, chosen her side. Not because of Lucas's influence or political maneuvering, but because she'd earned their respect through her own actions. The class continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The women were more engaged, asking deeper questions, treating Clara not as a curiosity, but as a genuine authority. After it ended, several women lingered to speak with her privately, sharing their own health concerns, seeking advice they'd previously been too uncertain to ask for. Clara walked home that evening feeling lighter than she had in months. She found Lucas in his study, working on correspondence, and pulled him from his chair into an exuberant embrace. They defended me, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. The women of the town stood up to Crowley and defended me, not because of you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Lucas held her tight, his own relief evident. I told you your worth would speak for itself eventually. You believed in me before I believed in myself, Clara said, pulling back to look at him. That's what made the difference. You gave me the chance to prove what I could do. That summer, they received word that Clara had been accepted to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania for the fall term. The decision of whether to go and how to manage it logistically consumed their conversations for weeks. Finally, they settled on a plan. Clara would attend for 1 year, bringing Emma and James with her. Lucas would manage the practice in Millbrook, and they would reunite each summer. It wasn't ideal, but it was possible. The night before Clara was to leave for Philadelphia, Lucas held her in their bed, both of them acutely aware of the year of separation ahead. I'm going to miss you terribly, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The bed will be too empty. The office will be too quiet. Everything will remind me that you're not here. I'll miss you too, Clara whispered. Every single day. But Lucas, this is important. Not just for me, but for all the women who'll come after me. Every female physician who's taken seriously makes it easier for the next one. I know. That's why I'm letting you go, even though it's going to hurt like hell. He kissed her deeply, desperately. Promise me you'll write. Every week. Every week, she agreed. And you promise to take care of yourself. Eat properly. Don't work yourself to exhaustion. Margaret will make sure I survive, he said with a weak smile. She's already threatened to drag me to the boarding house for dinner every Sunday. The farewell at the train station was one of the hardest things Clara had ever endured. The twins, now walking and babbling, didn't understand why their mother was crying as she kissed their father goodbye. Lucas held her for a long moment, his face buried in her hair, his arms tight around her waist. 1 year, he said. Just 1 year. And then you come home. Home, Clara repeated, savoring the word. Yes, I'll come home. The year in Philadelphia was grueling and exhilarating in equal measure. Clara studied anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, obstetrics. She dissected cadavers with shaking hands that gradually steadied. She delivered babies under supervision, treated patients in the teaching hospital, absorbed knowledge with the desperate intensity of someone making up for lost time. The other students, mostly women from wealthy families with progressive fathers, were initially skeptical of the frontier widow with her 2 small children. But Clara's practical experience and fierce determination won them over, and she graduated at the top of her class. Lucas kept his promise to write every week. His letters were full of news from Millbrook, updates on the practice, expressions of how much he missed her. Clara kept them all, reading and rereading them on difficult nights when the studying seemed overwhelming and the separation unbearable. When she finally returned to Millbrook in June, carrying her medical degree and her 2 chattering toddlers, Lucas was waiting at the train station. He looked thinner, tired, but his face lit up when he saw her. Clara ran to him, the twins squealing with delight at seeing their father, and they stood on the platform holding each other while the world moved around them. Welcome home, Dr. Bennett, Lucas said, and the pride in his voice made Clara's eyes sting with tears. It's good to be home. The town's reaction to Clara's return was overwhelmingly positive. Dr. Clara Bennett, the first female physician in the territory, was a source of civic pride now, rather than scandal. The Ladies' Moral Improvement Society hosted a reception in her honor. The town council passed a resolution officially welcoming her to the community. Even Edmund Crowley, grown gray and diminished in the past year, managed a stiff nod when they passed on the street. Clara and Lucas established a true partnership in the medical practice, hanging a new sign that read, Bennett Medical Practice, Lucas Bennett, MD, and Clara Bennett, MD. They divided the work according to their strengths, Lucas handling surgical cases and complex diagnostics, Clara focusing on obstetrics and pediatrics. Together, they provided comprehensive care to the growing community, training other women in basic medical skills, advocating for public health measures that saved countless lives. The twins grew up in the medical office, playing quietly in the corner while their parents worked, learning early that healing was both a science and a calling. Emma, bold and brilliant, announced at age 6 that she would be a surgeon like Papa. James, gentle and observant, declared he'd be a teacher instead, passing on knowledge to others the way his parents had taught him. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Clara to visit the 2 graves on the hill overlooking town. Catherine's marker stood beside a smaller stone for the baby who'd never drawn breath. A short distance away was the memorial Lucas had commissioned for Thomas and little Henry Hayes. Not graves, as their bodies lay in Philadelphia, but a remembrance nonetheless. Clara placed flowers on all 4 stones, speaking quietly to the ghosts of their past. Thank you for loving us well enough that we knew how to love again. Thank you for the gifts you gave us, even if we had to let you go. Lucas wrapped his arm around her waist, and they stood together in the summer sunshine, honoring what had been while celebrating what was. That evening, sitting on their porch while the twins chased fireflies in the yard, Clara reflected on the impossible journey that had brought her here. She'd arrived in Millbrook as a desperate widow with 2 babies and nothing but hope. She'd been rejected, judged, nearly exiled, but she'd also found love, purpose, and a place to belong. She'd become a physician, a teacher, a respected member of the community. She'd built a family from the ashes of loss, proving that sometimes the life you're meant for only reveals itself after the life you planned falls completely apart. Lucas took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, Catherine's ring and the wedding band he'd added last year glinting in the fading light. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about stagecoaches and snowstorms, Claire said softly. About all the moments that felt like endings but turned out to be beginnings. About how the worst day of my life, being rejected in front of the entire town, led to the best decision I ever made. Marrying me? Lucas asked with a smile. Working with you, learning from you, building something that matters. She squeezed his hand. The marriage was just a bonus. He laughed and pulled her close, kissing her temple. A bonus. I'll have to tell our grandchildren that their grandmother considered their grandfather a bonus. Grandchildren, Claire repeated, watching Emma and James play. I suppose that's the next chapter, isn't it? Years down the road when these 2 are grown and starting families of their own. Years and years, Lucas agreed. A whole lifetime of chapters still to write. They sat together as darkness fell, watching their children play, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night. Somewhere in Millbrook, a baby was being born, a wound was healing, a life was being saved by the knowledge and care of 2 physicians who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Clara had crossed half a continent searching for security and found instead something far more valuable: purpose, partnership, and proof that rejection could be redirection towards something infinitely better than what had been planned. She'd been the mail-order bride who arrived with twin babies only to be refused by her intended groom. But that refusal had led her to Lucas Bennett, to a medical career, to a life of meaning and contribution. The man who'd rejected her had faded into irrelevance, his name rarely spoken, his influence diminished. But Clara's name was spoken often, with respect and gratitude, by the families she'd helped and the women she'd inspired. That, she thought, was the best possible revenge. Not bitterness or retaliation, but a life so full and meaningful that the rejection that might have destroyed her became instead the foundation of her greatest success. Emma ran up to the porch, her face flushed and happy, fireflies glowing in the jar she carried. Mama, look! I caught 7! Clara pulled her daughter into her lap, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. 7 is wonderful, sweetheart. Now let's watch them glow together before we let them go. Why do we have to let them go? Because keeping beautiful things trapped isn't love, Clara said, the lesson hard won over years of loss and learning. Real love gives things space to fly free, trusting they'll come back if they're meant to. Emma considered this seriously, then nodded and opened the jar. The fireflies drifted up into the darkening sky, their lights winking like earthbound stars. James joined them on the porch, climbing into Lucas's lap, and they sat together, a family forged from grief and choice and stubborn hope, watching the fireflies dance while the first stars appeared overhead. This was home. Not the home Clara had sought when she boarded that stagecoach months ago, but a better one. A home built not on promises and arrangements, but on respect and partnership and love that had grown organically from shared purpose and mutual admiration. A home where two broken people had found each other and discovered that their jagged edges fit together perfectly, creating something whole and strong and beautiful. The mail-order bride who'd been rejected had become Dr. Clara Bennett, healer and teacher, wife and mother, a woman who'd transformed humiliation into triumph through nothing more than perseverance and the willingness to believe she deserved better than what had been offered. And every day, for the rest of her life, she would prove that belief correct. The fireflies continued their dance in the summer darkness, their brief lights a reminder that beauty doesn't need to last forever to be worth celebrating. Clara held her daughter close, felt her husband's steady presence beside her, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The rejection that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning. The worst thing that could have happened had turned into the best thing possible. And the family she'd built from the wreckage of her plans was more valuable than any future she could have imagined. This was how stories were supposed to end, not with easy happiness, but with earned joy. Not with perfect circumstances, but with people who loved each other enough to face imperfect circumstances together. Not with the absence of pain, but with the strength to transform pain into purpose. Clara Hayes Bennett had arrived in Millbrook with nothing but 2 babies and desperate hope. She'd been refused by the man who'd promised her a future, but in that refusal she'd found something better than security or convenience. She'd found herself, her strength, her calling, her home. And that, she thought, as the stars brightened overhead and her family sat together in peaceful contentment, was worth every hardship she'd endured to find it.